The forest was her only companion. For 12 long years, Liana had moved through its shadows like a ghost, her voice buried beneath her tongue, her spirit bound by silence. Every day began the same way, with the cold water of the Silver Moon River washing over her fingers as she crouched by its bank. The surface reflected back a face she barely recognized anymore. Wild amber eyes, tan skin from sun and wind, hair tumbling in tangled waves past her waist. Time had carved away the softness of childhood, leaving only sharp edges and a gaze that never stopped searching the horizon for danger. She was a survivor, though survival had not been a choice. It had been commanded of her on the night flames, consumed everything she loved. Her mother's final words still echoed in the back of her mind whenever silence pressed too heavily. Run, and do not look back. Do not make a sound. They hunt by sound. Liana had been 10 years old then, a child stripped of family, of pack, of safety. Now at 22, the command had become her way of being. To speak was to invite discovery. To sing was to summon death. Silence was not just habit. It was law written in her very blood. The years in solitude had etched themselves deep into her bones. She had built a shelter hidden within a hillside, camouflaged with stone and wood, a dwelling so carefully disguised it appeared to be nothing more than an outcropping of earth. Inside, she had shaped a small life, a hearth that let smoke escape unseen, furs piled for warmth, bundles of herbs hung from the ceiling. Tools of survival rested, where her hands could find them even in darkness. It was not comfort, but it was safety, and for 12 years, safety had been enough. The mornings were the only time she allowed herself a moment of stillness. When the world hovered between night and day, when mist clung to the river like reluctant ghosts, she would breathe deeply and imagine she belonged somewhere. The scent of pine and wet soil filled her lungs, grounding her. For those brief breaths, she was not a fugitive nor a shadow, but simply alive. Once the sun crested the mountains, she became invisible again, her steps soundless, her body blending with the forest. Every motion was practiced, every sound suppressed, until even the animals of the wood accepted her as another predator passing through. The wolf within her had not seen the moonlight in 12 years. She had not shifted once since that night of fire and blood. At first it had been fear that the hunters who slaughtered her pack would sense her energy, track her down, finish what they started. Later, fear had become habit, and habit had hardened into choice. The wolf was too wild, too hungry for connection, too likely to howl her loneliness into the night. Silence had become her shield. Humanity had become her prison. But silence has its limits. Loneliness is a hollow that even the strongest walls cannot contain forever. That night, when the moon rose full and heavy above the treetops, Liana felt its pull like a weight pressing on her chest. The forest gleamed with silver light, shadows stretching long across the earth. Restlessness burned beneath her skin. She could not stay inside her shelter, could not bear the stillness of 4 walls. She needed the river. She needed the open air. She needed something unnamed. She slipped out into the night as she had countless times before, moving like mist between trees. The river greeted her, its surface shining like a ribbon of silver. She sat upon a flat rock at its edge, her bare feet dangling above the cold current. For a moment, she simply listened. The babble of water, the rustle of leaves stirred by wind, the small scurry of creatures unseen. Yet the quiet was not comfort tonight. It pressed against her chest until her breath came shallow, until her throat ached with words unsaid, until silence itself became unbearable. Without thinking, without planning, Liana opened her mouth. A single note slipped free, trembling and uncertain, so soft it barely disturbed the night air. It felt foreign, as though her voice belonged to another. She had not heard herself in 12 years. Yet once the sound began, it would not stop. The note stretched into a melody, hesitant at first, then gathering strength as her memory remembered what her body had forgotten. Music poured out of her, wordless but full of everything she had carried, grief and longing, sorrow and hope, the ache of endless solitude. It was haunting, beautiful, and threaded with something older than the mountains, something she did not understand. The river seemed to respond, its current shimmering as though carrying her song along its length. The forest grew still. Every creature listened. The power in her voice had always been hidden, even from herself, but now it unfurled like a banner caught by wind. Liana closed her eyes, surrendering to it, singing not to be heard, but to release what would otherwise shatter her from within. She sang to the moon, to the stars, to the memories of those lost, and to her own spirit still clinging to life. What she could not know was that her voice carried far beyond the forest, beyond the borders of her sanctuary. The river amplified her gift, sending it rippling outward across the land. Miles away, in a fortress carved into the side of a mountain, Alpha King Matthias Blackthorn paused mid-command. His golden eyes sharpened, his senses catching a melody none of his advisors could hear. He silenced them with a word, moving to the balcony where night stretched endlessly before him. On the wind came the voice, fragile yet powerful, calling to something deep within his wolf. He had never heard its like before. It was not merely song, it was magic. Song magic, rare and dangerous, the kind bound by law to crown and kingdom. His wolf stirred restlessly beneath his skin. Whoever she was, wherever she hid, she had betrayed her presence with a single song. And Matthias Blackthorn, Alpha King of the Western Territories, always found what he sought. Back by the river, Liana's melody faded into silence. Her throat felt raw, but her spirit lighter, as though she had shed 12 years of sorrow in a single breath. Tears streaked her face. For this night alone, she had allowed herself to be heard. Tomorrow, she told herself, she would return to silence. Tomorrow, she would bury her voice again. Yet as she slipped back toward her shelter, a shiver traced her spine. The forest seemed too quiet. Something had shifted. Deep down, instinct whispered that her song had traveled farther than she ever intended. Tomorrow would not be the same. The council chamber of Blackthorn Fortress was alive with argument. Advisors spoke over one another, voices echoing off stone walls, their concerns circling the same endless disputes over borders, alliances, and the fragile peace that had been carved with blood and fear. Matthias Blackthorn, Alpha King of the Western Territories, sat at the head of the long table, his jaw tight, his patience fraying like rope pulled too taut. The flickering light of torches cast sharp shadows across his angular features, making him seem more predator than man. Yet in the midst of the noise, something else caught his attention. Something subtle, fragile, impossibly distant, but unmistakably real. A sound that did not belong to his chamber or his quarrelsome council. He raised a hand abruptly. "Silence," he commanded. The word cut through the chamber like a blade. Instantly, voices died, leaving only the crackle of fire. His advisors froze, confused but unwilling to challenge the authority in his tone. Matthias pushed back his chair and rose, his golden eyes narrowing, turning not toward the men who awaited his judgment, but toward the night. The fortress had been built high upon the mountain for reasons of defense, but for Matthias it had always been more than stone and walls. From its heights he could hear what others could not, the whispers of the wind, the cries of wolves miles below, the shifting heartbeat of the forest that lay at the kingdom's edge. Now, carried across that wind, came a melody unlike anything he had known. A woman's voice, threaded with power, fragile yet unbreakable, reaching him as though distance and time had no meaning. It struck him not only with its beauty, but with its resonance. His wolf stirred violently, restless beneath his skin, pressing against the fragile barrier of his human form. His advisors shifted uncomfortably as they watched their king still and tense, listening to something none of them could hear. "My lord," one ventured hesitantly. Matthias did not turn his head. His gaze was fixed upon the dark horizon. He inhaled deeply, as though he could drink the melody into his lungs and hold it there. The song vibrated through his bones, calling to instincts older than memory. It was no ordinary voice. It was song magic. Eldrick, his most trusted counselor, cleared his throat softly. "You hear it again, don't you?" Matthias gave a single curt nod. Murmurs spread around the table. Song magic was rare, nearly extinct. Those who possessed it were bound by law to the crown, their gifts too dangerous to be left wandering unchecked. To bend hearts and sway minds with nothing more than a melody that was power kingdoms would kill to possess. Where? Eldrick asked quietly. Matthias's jaw tightened. His eyes swept the shadowed valleys stretching below the fortress. The Silver Moon River, he said at last, near the old borderlands. The chamber grew still. Those lands had been empty since the wars that tore apart pacts and kingdoms. No settlements remained within 20 miles of that river, no voices to sing, and yet one had. One of the generals shifted uneasily. If it is song magic, then she is unregistered. She hides from the crown. That alone is treason. Matthias turned from the balcony, his expression a mask of determination carved in stone. It is not merely treason, it is power hidden in my territory. Power strong enough to reach me here. I will not leave it unchecked. Eldrick's aged eyes met his, calm but calculating. And if she refuses you, my king? Matthias's lips curved, not into a smile, but into something darker. Then she will learn that refusal is not an option. I collect what is valuable, Eldrick, and this is beyond value. He looked around at the council, their faces pale with unease. Prepare my guard, he ordered, his voice brooking no dissent. We ride at dawn. And Izraz al-Dove. The chamber erupted into motion, soldiers rushing to obey, advisors murmuring among themselves. Yet Matthias lingered at the balcony, staring into the endless dark where the river cut through forest like a blade of silver. The song had ended, but its echo still thrummed in his chest. It was not only power that had stirred his wolf. It was something else, something older and more dangerous. Recognition. As if the voice belonged not to a stranger, but to a memory he had never lived, a bond he had never forged, yet somehow always awaited. Who are you? He thought, his golden eyes unblinking against the night. And why does your song call to me? Far away in the hidden hollow she called home, Liana curled upon her bed of furs. The weight of exhaustion pressed down on her, but sleep eluded her. She did not know that her single moment of weakness had already rippled outward, breaking her solitude beyond repair. She did not know that an Alpha King had heard her voice and that he would not rest until he found her. Liana woke before dawn, though she had barely slept. The shadows within her shelter clung to her like a second skin, and the weight of the night before pressed against her chest with relentless force. She lay still, staring at the rough ceiling of earth and timber, her heart beating faster than it should. For 12 years she had trusted silence to shield her. Last night she had broken it. And now every instinct screamed that something had changed. The forest outside was too quiet. It was not the familiar hush of dawn, when the world waited breathless for the first birdsong. No, this silence was heavier, charged, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath. Liana sat up, her hand already reaching for the knife she kept by her bed of furs. The blade was small, meant for hunting and survival, not combat, but its weight steadied her. She slid into her worn boots, wrapped her deerskin cloak around her shoulders, and moved toward the entrance. Her shelter had always felt like protection, but today its walls felt like a trap. She slipped outside, careful not to disturb the dry leaves she had placed as markers near the entrance. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and distant snow, though the season had not yet turned. She scanned the trees, her eyes narrowing as the pale light of early morning filtered through the branches. Nothing moved. No birds, no rustle of small animals. Even the river's song seemed subdued, its constant murmur hushed, like a voice that dared not rise. Her pulse quickened. Liana trusted her instincts. They had kept her alive when reason might have faltered, when grief had threatened to drown her in the first years of solitude. She crouched low and began to check the perimeter of her sanctuary. Over the years, she had laid simple warnings. Small stacks of stones that would tumble if disturbed. Threads stretched between trees at ankle height. Piles of brittle leaves placed in seemingly random patches that would crunch beneath careless feet. These had saved her before, giving her precious seconds to vanish when hunters or wanderers strayed too close. Now she moved through the trees like a shadow, scanning each marker with sharp eyes. Every pile of leaves was undisturbed, every thread remained taut. The stones lay precisely as she had left them. Nothing had been broken, nothing had been touched. By all appearances, she was still hidden, still safe, and yet the tension in her chest did not ease. If anything, it grew heavier, like a storm pressing at the edge of her senses. She stopped by a thick oak and rested her palm against its bark. The wolf within her stirred uneasily, pressing against the human walls she had built around it. She had not shifted in 12 years, but her wolf had not died. It slept, restless, chained by her fear. Now it strained, whispering of danger, whispering of hunters on the wind. Liana drew a slow breath, trying to quiet the rising panic. She had learned not to ignore her instincts. They had never lied. By midday, she had circled the entire area she considered her territory. She returned to the shelter with her jaw tight and her body taut with unease. She should have felt relief that nothing had been disturbed, but there was no relief, only a deeper certainty that something unseen was drawing closer. Her traps told her she was alone. Her instincts told her otherwise. Inside, she forced herself to focus. She gathered supplies as though preparing for flight. Dried meat wrapped in leaves, a water skin filled at the river's edge, bundles of herbs tied with twine, her flint and steel, her knife, and the small wooden box she had carried with her since childhood. That box held the few remnants of a life lost to fire, a silver pendant her mother had worn, a small book of healing lore, and a vial of shimmering liquid her mother had called River's Tears. Liana touched the box with reverence, but did not open it. To do so now would be to admit how desperate she had become, and she was not ready for that admission. Her thoughts chased one another in circles. She could remain here, trust her traps, and hope the unease was nothing more than guilt for having broken her silence. Or she could prepare to vanish deeper into the wilderness, abandoning the home she had built with her own hands. The thought twisted like a knife in her chest. This shelter was all she had left of stability, all she had carved out from the ashes of her childhood. To leave it would be to admit that her song had doomed her. She was still pacing when the sound came. A single crack, sharp as thunder in the still forest, a branch snapping under weight. Liana froze, her blood turning to ice. Another sound followed, distant but unmistakable. The rhythmic thunder of hooves. Not one horse, but many. Her breath caught, her body rigid. For 12 years, she had avoided humans and shifters alike. Horses meant riders, riders meant danger. Her first instinct was to run. The forest was her ally, its paths and shadows known to her as intimately as the lines of her own hand. She could vanish. But even as she crouched to flee, something else held her still. Perhaps it was the weight of exhaustion after so many years of hiding. Perhaps it was curiosity, the need to see who or what dared intrude into her sanctuary. Or perhaps it was the pull of destiny, that invisible thread she had unknowingly loosed when she sang. Silently, she climbed the oak beside her shelter. Her movements swift and sure despite the pounding of her heart. She pressed herself against the trunk, cloaked by fresh spring leaves, and waited. The sound grew louder. Branches broke, earth trembled, the rhythm of hooves steady and purposeful. Then they appeared. Dark figures on massive steeds, emerging from the trees like shadows given form. They were no ordinary soldiers. Their armor gleamed black and silver, catching shards of light as they rode. Their mounts were bred for war, huge and muscled, yet moving with uncanny quiet. At their center rode a man who commanded attention without effort. Taller than the others, his broad shoulders and straight posture radiating authority. His hair was dark as a raven's wing, tied back to reveal a face carved with harsh beauty. Even at this distance, Liana knew who he was. The Alpha King, Matthias Blackthorn. She had never seen him in the flesh, but she had heard the stories whispered in fear and awe. The ruthless ruler who had united the Western territories with blood and iron. The wolf whose golden eyes could pierce lies and strip a soul bare. The man who brokered peace by force, who bent kingdoms to his will, who was both protector and predator. And now he sat astride a black steed not 50 paces from her hidden home. Lyanna's blood ran cold. She understood now what her instincts had warned. Her song had traveled farther than she dreamed. It had reached him, and he had come. The company drew to a halt at the river's edge, directly across from her shelter. Matthias dismounted in a single fluid motion, his movements betraying his shifter strength even in human form. He crouched at the water's edge, his head tilting as though listening to something only he could hear. Then he lifted his gaze, and for one terrifying moment, his golden eyes fixed directly upon her hiding place. "I know you are there," his voice rang deep and unyielding, carrying across the water with ease. "The one who sang last night, I heard you." It's it. Lyanna's breath seized in her throat. Her heart hammered so loud she feared he could hear it. She had hidden for 12 years, and yet in a single night, her silence had betrayed her. The fortress of Blackthorn rarely slept. Even in the deep hours before dawn, torches burned along the high walls, soldiers patrolled in steady rhythm, and the restless heartbeat of a kingdom in constant tension echoed through stone corridors. Yet within the council chamber, the air was heavier than usual, charged with an anticipation that none of the gathered dared name aloud. Matthias Blackthorn stood at the center of it, a storm contained within flesh. He was not a man who wasted words, and silence from him carried more weight than speeches from lesser kings. His advisors shifted uneasily, their eyes flicking from one another to the Alpha King, who had summoned them in the dark of night with no explanation. The only sound was the steady tap of his gauntleted fingers against the arm of his chair, a rhythm that betrayed both patience and contained aggression. Finally, Eldrick spoke. The elder counselor was silver-haired, his frame still strong despite the years, his gaze sharp with wisdom tempered by experience. He had served Matthias's father before him, and his counsel was the one voice Matthias allowed closer than others. "You heard it again," Eldrick said quietly, not as a question but as certainty. Matthias's golden eyes lifted, burning with an intensity that silenced even the whisper of robes as others shifted in their seats. "Yes," he said. The word was simple, but it carried the weight of thunder. Some of the generals exchanged glances, skeptical, though none dared voice it. Song magic was legend, more myth than reality for many who had never encountered it. To speak of it openly was to acknowledge forces older and wilder than steel and blood. "You are certain?" one of the younger advisors asked cautiously. "It could be a trick. Or the wind. There are echoes in the mountains that—" Matthias's glare cut him off before the sentence was finished. "Do not insult me with foolishness," he said, his voice a low growl. "The wind does not stir my wolf. The echoes of stone do not carry power that bends the air itself. This was song magic, and it came from the Silver Moon River." A murmur rippled through the chamber at the name. The Silver Moon River had long been abandoned since the border wars. Few dared go near its banks. Old tales clung to it, stories of battles fought and blood spilled, of spirits lingering where packs had fallen. That anything still lived there was itself a surprise. That something powerful enough to sing across kingdoms did so in secret was cause for alarm. Eldrick leaned forward, his hands clasped before him. If it is truly song magic, then the law is clear. No bearer of such power may live outside the authority of the crown. She must be brought here, trained, registered, and bound by oath. "She," Matthias repeated, tasting the word. His wolf had felt it, the timbre of the voice, the shape of its resonance. It had been a woman's song, threaded with grief and yearning, fragile yet stronger than steel. He had no doubt. One of the generals frowned. "Forgive me, my king, but song magic is dangerous. The histories tell us that even those trained to control it sometimes lost themselves to the power. It can sway armies, bend the will of kings, incite rebellion with nothing more than a melody. Are we prepared to risk—" Matthias's hand slammed against the arm of his chair, the sound reverberating through the chamber like a strike of iron. "We are not prepared to risk leaving such power unchecked," he said coldly. "Would you prefer she wander free, her voice reaching enemy ears? Do you imagine Darius would hesitate to claim her if he learned of her existence?" The name of the Eastern Alpha drew a darker silence. Darius had tested the borders too many times, his ambition as endless as his hunger for conquest. If word of a song mage in the west reached him, war would follow before the snows melted. "No," Matthias continued, rising to his full height, towering over those seated before him. "We will not allow it. She is in my lands, and that makes her mine." His words carried no softness, no space for dissent. To Matthias, rare power was not only to be claimed, but to be protected. He had built his rule upon the principle that strength must be gathered, never wasted. His soldiers, his generals, his council, each piece was a weapon in his arsenal. And now he had heard a weapon forged of music, one older and sharper than anything steel could make. Eldrick studied him, his expression unreadable. "And if she resists?" he asked. Matthias's lips curved in something that was not quite a smile. "Then I will remind her what it means to defy the Alpha King." There was no boasting in his tone, no arrogance, only the calm statement of fact. Matthias Blackthorn had united fractured packs through fear and fire. He had crushed rebellion, not with endless slaughter, but with precise ruthlessness. Those who resisted either bent the knee or vanished. The Alpha King always found what he sought, and when he did, he never released it. Still, Eldrick pressed cautiously. "My king, forgive my bluntness, but song magic is not like other gifts. It responds to the heart as much as the will. Force may bend it, but it will never truly serve you that way. If you wish to wield it, you must first understand it." Matthias regarded him with those piercing golden eyes, and for a moment silence reigned. Then, unexpectedly, he inclined his head. "Perhaps," he allowed, "but understanding begins with possession. Until she stands before me, the rest is irrelevant." He turned toward the chamber doors, his cloak sweeping behind him like the shadow of a storm. "At dawn we ride. Prepare my guard. I want scouts sent ahead to the Silver Moon River. No trace of her is to escape me. She has hidden for 12 years, but her voice betrayed her. That is all I need." The council scrambled to obey, rising in a flurry of robes and armor. Only Eldrick lingered, his gaze following his king with something between concern and resignation. He had served Matthias long enough to know when his mind was set. Yet still he wondered what the Alpha King would do when he faced the woman whose voice had reached him. Would he see her as weapon, prisoner, or something more? Outside, dawn crept over the mountains, washing the world in pale gold. In the fortress stables, soldiers prepared their mounts, black and silver armor gleaming under torchlight. War horses stamped and snorted, their breath steaming in the chill air. Standards bearing the Wolf of Blackthorn were unfurled, snapping in the wind. The Alpha King's company was gathering, disciplined and relentless, a storm waiting only for his signal. Matthias descended the stone steps, his presence alone commanding silence. His gaze swept over the assembled soldiers, the corners of his mouth set in grim determination. The memory of the song still lingered in his chest, a ghost of sound that refused to fade. It had called to something within him he could not name, and he would not rest until he knew why. As he mounted his great black steed, the sun broke over the peaks, bathing the fortress in light. Matthias's golden eyes glinted like fire. "Find her," he said, his voice carrying to every ear. The gates opened. The Alpha King and his army rode out, descending the mountain toward the Silver Moon River, where one woman's voice had shattered 12 years of silence. And though Liana did not yet know it, the echo of her song had already bound her fate to the most feared ruler in the territories. The river lay like a silver blade between them. On one bank, the company of the Alpha King had drawn to a halt, their black and silver armor glinting faintly beneath the morning sunday. On the other bank, concealed high in the branches of a great oak, Liana pressed her body against the rough bark, her breath shallow, her heart hammering so loudly she feared it might betray her before her voice could. For 12 years she had been nothing but shadow, nothing but silence, yet in a single night of weakness she had been discovered. Now the man she had feared and avoided all her life stood at the river's edge, his golden eyes piercing the distance as though he could strip away her concealment with nothing more than a glance. Matthias Blackthorn, Alpha King of the Western Territories, the wolf who had broken packs and bent entire kingdoms to his will. She had never laid eyes upon him before, but every story she had ever heard had painted him as unyielding, ruthless, unstoppable, and now here he was, no tale, no rumor, but flesh and blood and power radiating from him like heat from a forge. The company waited in disciplined silence. Their horses shifted restlessly, stamping the ground, but none of the riders spoke. All eyes followed their king, who crouched at the water's edge with the patience of a predator. He dipped his fingers briefly into the current, as though testing it for secrets, then lifted his gaze once more toward the trees. "I know you are there," he called, his voice carrying effortlessly across the river. It was not a shout, but the steady resonance of authority that needed no force to be heard. "The one who sang last night. I heard you." Liana's grip tightened on the branch above her. Every instinct urged her to leap from the tree and run, to melt into the forest and vanish, as she had done countless times before. She knew paths no horse could follow, knew the secret ways where shadows grew thickest. But another part of her foolish, reckless, hungry for something beyond solitude kept her rooted in place. Matthias rose to his full height, his cloak shifting behind him in the breeze, his golden eyes never leaving the trees. "You have hidden yourself well," he continued, his tone almost appreciative. 12 years, if my scouts are correct. That is no small feat." Her breath caught. He knows. Somehow he knew exactly how long she had been here. The thought was both terrifying and suffocating. If he knew that, what else did he know? "I have no interest in harming you," Matthias said, his voice deep and even. "Quite the opposite. Your gift is rare, valuable. I have come to offer you protection and a place in my court." Protection. Court. The words might have sounded like salvation to another. To Liana, they were a cage. Her mother's warnings came back sharp as a blade. "Hide your voice. Never let them know. Those with song magic belong to the crown, and once claimed, you will never be free again." Matthias's tone hardened, the velvet edge falling away to reveal iron beneath. "Of course," he added, "this is not truly a request. Those with song magic fall under royal jurisdiction. The law requires your registration and your service." There it was, spoken without deception. Not invitation, but command. Not protection, but control. Liana's chest tightened with fury and fear. She had lived like a ghost to avoid this very fate. To serve in a court was to be used, to have her gift bent and wielded as weapon. She would rather die in silence than live in chains of music. Her knife was still strapped at her side, though what good it could do against an army she could not say. She adjusted her grip, steadying her trembling hand. The branch beneath her creaked faintly, and she froze, praying no soldier's ear had caught it. Matthias's golden gaze lingered on the trees, as though he had heard or perhaps sensed her presence in some deeper way. "I will give you until sundown," he called at last, his words carrying the weight of judgment. "Reveal yourself willingly, and no harm will come to you. Refuse, and my men will cross the river and find you. Do not make this difficult. You have been alone long enough." He turned then, giving a single command to his soldiers. They began to dismount, erecting a camp with efficient precision at the water's edge. Tents rose, fires were kindled, and patrols were set without wasted motion. They were not here for a brief search. They were prepared to wait as long as their king commanded. Liana's heart pounded in her ears. She pressed herself tighter against the oak's trunk, scarcely daring to breathe. He had laid down his terms, and the hours of her freedom were slipping away like sand through her fingers. The sun climbed higher, gilding the river in light, but Liana remained in the branches, her body stiff, her mind racing. She could run deeper into the forest, vanish into lands Matthias's soldiers did not know, yet he was Alpha King. His reach stretched farther than any border. If he wished to find her, he would not stop until he did. She descended from the tree as silently as she had climbed it, slipping back toward her shelter. Her steps were swift, though she kept to shadow, avoiding every patch of ground that might betray her. Inside, she paced the small space, her thoughts circling desperately. To reveal herself was to surrender. To flee was to abandon the only home she had known since childhood. To fight was madness. One woman against an army led by the most feared alpha in the world was suicide. Her gaze fell upon the small wooden box in the corner. She crossed to it, her fingers brushing the lid as though it might burn her. Inside lay her mother's pendant, her book of lore, and the vial of River's tears. She stared at it, her mind clawing for a plan. That elixir could mask her presence, could hide her energy for a short time. With it, she might circle behind the Alpha King's company, cross the river unseen, and vanish into the wilds beyond. It was not hope, not truly, but it was a chance. She lifted the vial, the faint blue light glimmering in the dim interior. She uncorked it, inhaling the sharp scent of rain and lightning. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. To use it was to admit that her sanctuary was already lost. To use it was to say goodbye. But as the sound of distant laughter drifted from across the river, soldiers at ease in their camp, waiting for their king's command, Liana's resolve hardened. She swallowed 3 drops. The liquid burned like ice and fire down her throat, searing her lungs, making her vision blur. Then came the tingling, spreading through her body, folding in upon itself until her wolf's essence and her song's power vanished from the air, masked completely. For an hour, perhaps less, she would be undetectable. She gathered what little she could carry, her knife, a pouch of dried food, her water skin, and the pendant that was her last tie to her mother. Everything else she left behind. She looked once around her shelter, her throat tight with grief. This had been her world, her home, her shield. Now it was only a memory. The sun dipped toward the horizon, staining the river with fire. Liana slipped into the trees, moving swiftly, silently, her body a shadow among shadows. She kept parallel to the river, downstream, where she knew a place where fallen logs spanned the current like a bridge. Her heart beat with the urgency of desperation, but her movements were precise, controlled. She would not waste this one chance. At last, she saw it. The tangle of moss-slick logs, precarious but passable. She scanned the opposite bank for soldiers, but saw none. Relief flickered through her chest. She stepped from the cover of leaves, her eyes fixed on the crossing. A voice spoke behind her, deep, calm, impossibly close. "Impressive," said the Alpha King. "I did not think you would risk the river." Liana spun, her knife already in her hand, though she knew it was no shield. Matthias Blackthorn stood less than 10 paces away, his massive frame cloaked in twilight, his golden eyes gleaming as though they saw directly into her soul. And in that instant, Liana knew she had not escaped him. He had been waiting for her all along. The air was thick with twilight, the last rays of the sun bleeding across the horizon, staining the river in hues of crimson and gold. Liana's breath caught in her throat as she faced the man who had haunted whispers and legends for as long as she could remember. Matthias Blackthorn stood before her, tall and unyielding, his golden eyes glinting with a predator's focus. He had moved with such silence that even her sharpened instincts had not warned her. He had hunted her as easily as if she were already his. Her knife trembled in her grip, the point angled toward him, though she knew it would serve as no true defense. He was Alpha King, forged in blood and dominance. She was one woman with little more than a blade meant for skinning rabbits, and a voice she had spent her life trying to bury. Yet still, she lifted her chin, forcing defiance into her posture, refusing to show fear even as it gnawed at her from within. "Stay back," she said, her voice rough, the sound strange on her tongue after so many years of silence. Something flickered across Matthias's eyes at the sound of her voice, as if the very act of hearing her speak unsettled him. It was not weakness she saw there, but recognition, a sharp awareness that pierced deeper than she wanted to allow. His lips curved, though the expression did not reach his eyes. "So, you do speak," he said softly, as though he had doubted it until this moment. His voice carried a weight that pressed against her skin, heavy with authority. I was beginning to wonder. Liana tightened her grip on the knife, stepping back until her shoulders brushed the rough bark of a pine tree. She could retreat no farther. The Alpha King took one step forward, closing the distance with a grace that spoke of both restraint and lethal power. He moved like the predator he was, not rushing, not lunging, but advancing with the patience of inevitability. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, forcing the words past the tightness in her throat. His golden gaze locked upon hers, steady and unflinching. "I told you already, your gift is rare, valuable. I do not allow such treasures to remain unguarded. I collect what is mine." The words struck her like a lash. Rage flared beneath her fear. "I am not a thing to be collected." For the first time, the faintest shadow of a smile touched his mouth, a fleeting acknowledgement of her defiance. "No," he admitted, "you are not a thing. You are a shifter with song magic who has lived illegally in my territory for 12 years. By rights, I could have you executed for trespassing alone, never mind the unauthorized use of power." Her jaw tightened. "Then why do you not?" Matthias stepped closer, so near now that the heat of his body reached her, so near she could see the flecks of amber within his golden irises. "Because wasting rare talents is poor governance," he said simply. "And because I am curious, what pack were you born to? How did you survive all these years alone? What drove you to sing last night after such silence?" Liana's pulse thundered in her ears. She felt the last traces of the river's tears fading from her veins, her wolf stirring faintly as her true essence began to reemerge. Soon he would sense her fully, her blood, her song, the power she had fought to bury. Panic pressed hard against her ribs. "I will not be a weapon for you," she snapped, the words torn from her in desperate defiance. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes, quick as lightning. "You do not understand your position," he said, his voice dropping into a low growl that sent shivers down her spine. "You have no choice in this matter. There is always a choice." Liana's chin lifted, her eyes burning with fury. "I chose freedom 12 years ago, and I choose it again now. And Her body moved before her mind had fully formed the decision. She lunged not at him but past him, aiming for the river crossing, a desperate gamble born of instinct. She had taken only 3 steps when his hand closed around her wrist with the strength of iron. The world spun as he wrenched her back, the knife flying from her grip as if it were no more than a twig. In the space of a heartbeat, she was pinned against the pine, his body caging hers, his presence overwhelming. His hand held her wrist immovably against the bark, his other arm braced beside her head. She could feel the heat radiating from him, the restrained violence thrumming beneath his skin. His wolf was there, so close to the surface she almost imagined she could see its shadow in the hard lines of his face. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice low and edged with command. "You will come with me to the capital. You will be trained to control your abilities, given a place, given respect. This is the only option that ends well for you." Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her heart slamming against her ribs, but still she held his gaze with defiance. "And if I refuse?" His expression hardened into something cold as stone. "Then I will consider you a threat to the crown, and threats are eliminated." The words hung between them like the promise of steel. Liana's breath hitched, not because she doubted him, but because she knew with absolute certainty that he meant it. The Alpha King was not a man who spoke empty threats. He would kill her if she forced him to. And yet something in his eyes told her he did not want to. It was not mercy. It was not kindness. It was something colder, more pragmatic. He saw her not as an enemy to be destroyed, but as a resource too valuable to waste. "Why did you sing?" he asked suddenly, his voice softer now, but no less intense. "After 12 years of silence, why break it last night?" The question pierced her more deeply than threats had. She swallowed hard, her throat tight. To admit the truth that loneliness had crushed her, that silence had become a cage she could no longer bear, was to bear herself in a way she could not allow. "It does not matter," she said at last, forcing the words past the weight in her chest. "It matters to me." His gaze searched hers, as if he could see the unspoken truth hidden in her eyes. Song magic responds to emotion. The stronger the feeling, the greater its power. What you sent across my lands last night was extraordinary. Liana turned her face away, unwilling to let him see the raw ache his words unearthed. "It was a mistake. One I will not repeat." "A shame," he murmured, and for the briefest moment his voice held something unexpected. "It was beautiful. Is en long." The admission stole the air from her lungs. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to nothing but the sound of his voice, the heat of his body, and the dangerous closeness of the man who had shattered her solitude. Then a sound split the air. A howl, long, sharp, and wrong. Matthias's head turned sharply, his body tensing, his grip on her wrist loosening. The howl rose again, joined by others, echoing through the trees in a pattern she recognized instantly, not communication. Encirclement. Hunting. Her blood ran cold. "Who are they?" she whispered. "Eastern pack," Matthias said tersely, his golden eyes narrowing as his wolf surged beneath his skin. "They have been testing my borders for months." Even as he spoke, dark figures emerged from the tree line, monstrous in half-shift, their bodies twisted between human and wolf. They spread like shadows, circling, their eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. The leader stepped forward, larger than the rest, his half-formed jaw curling into a cruel smile. "Well, well," he sneered. "The great Alpha King caught alone and unguarded. The Eastern Alpha will be pleased." Liana's heart thundered as Matthias shifted his stance, releasing her and stepping forward, his posture deceptively relaxed. But she saw the storm coiled within him, ready to be unleashed. "Kale," Matthias said, his voice low and dangerous, "still carrying out Darius's dirty work, I see." "And there's a peace?" the wolfman snarled. "Better that than ruling through fear and chains, Blackthorn." Matthias's golden eyes blazed. "If you touch her," he said softly, "I will remove your head from your shoulders." Liana's breath caught. A moment ago, he had threatened to kill her himself. Now he claimed her protection. She did not understand, but she had no time to. Kale's grin widened, cruel and mocking. He raised a clawed hand. "Take them both." The forest erupted in violence. Kale's command unleashed the half-shifted wolves, their bodies twisted between human and beast, muscles coiled with unnatural strength. They lunged with snarling fury, claws glinting, jaws snapping in hunger for blood. The ground trembled beneath their charge, and the air filled with the stench of sweat, earth, and wolf musk. Matthias was already moving. He exploded forward with a speed that defied the human eye, his body a blur of controlled violence. He did not shift, though the power of his wolf seared beneath his skin. He met the first attacker head-on, his fist colliding with the wolf's throat in a strike so precise and brutal that bone cracked and breath died in a choking gasp. Before the body hit the ground, Matthias spun, his elbow slamming into the temple of another, sending the beast sprawling with a howl of pain. Liana stumbled backward, her heart hammering wildly. She had seen wolves fight before, hunters, beasts, desperate skirmishes on the edge of survival. But she had never seen anything like this. Matthias moved like a storm incarnate, untamed and merciless, his golden eyes burning with predatory fire. Every motion was fluid, every strike fatal. He was the Alpha King, not because of stories, but because he was unstoppable. Yet the enemy was many, and they pressed in from all sides, 6 wolves to 1 man. Their claws slashed, their teeth snapped, Their monstrous bodies circled him with hunting precision. Liana's eyes darted to her fallen knife. She dove for it, snatching it up as one of the wolves peeled away from the fight and lunged toward her. He was massive, half his face distorted into muzzle, saliva dripping from elongated fangs. His claws cut through the air where her head had been a heartbeat earlier as she rolled aside, her body moving on, instinct honed by years of survival. She slashed upward, the blade grazing his arm, drawing a line of blood. The wolf snarled, his eyes narrowing with cruel amusement. Not just a rabbit after all, he rasped through his distorted throat. He circled her with slow steps, his claws flexing. Fear surged like a tide within her. The knife shook in her grip, but her gaze never wavered. She knew she could not match him in strength. If she fought as a human, she would die. The wolf inside her pressed hard against the walls of her control, restless, demanding release. But she could not. She had buried it too deep, too long. Another path opened in her mind. The one she feared more than the wolf. The one she had sworn never to use. Her voice. Her chest tightened, her throat dry as ash. For 12 years she had silenced it. To speak was danger. To sing was death. But now, with the beast closing in, his claws ready to tear through her, she felt the truth burn inside her. Silence would kill her faster than song ever could. The wolf lunged. Liana opened her mouth and sang. The note that burst forth was sharp and focused, vibrating with more than sound. It carried her will, her command, her desperate need for survival. "Sleep!" she cried, her voice cracking the air like a whip. The effect was immediate. The wolf faltered mid-stride, his eyes widening, his body shuddering as though invisible chains bound him. His legs buckled. He collapsed at her feet, unconscious, his monstrous body twitching once before going still. Liana staggered back, her knife clattering to the ground. Her chest heaved, her throat burning from the unaccustomed power. Her body trembled as if the single word had drained her entire strength. When she lifted her eyes, she found Matthias staring at her across the battlefield. 3 bodies already lay broken at his feet, blood steaming in the cold night air. His golden gaze burned, not with fury, but with something sharper, recognition. He had seen her power, and he understood exactly what it was. Another wolf lunged for him, and the moment shattered. Matthias moved again, a blur of lethal force, his fist crushing the beast's jaw, his knee snapping ribs with a sound that made Liana flinch. The remaining attackers hesitated, their confidence faltering. The unconscious wolf at Liana's feet was proof enough. Song magic was not legend, not rumor. It was real, and it was standing with the Alpha King. Kael snarled, his half-formed face twisted in rage. "Cowards! Kill them both!" But even as he shouted, his eyes flicked uneasily toward Liana. She met his gaze, and for the first time she saw hesitation in his cruel expression. He feared her. The 2 remaining wolves exchanged a glance, then backed away into the shadows. Their retreat was swift, their monstrous forms vanishing into the trees with unnerving silence. Matthias stood tall among the bodies, his chest rising steadily, his hands bloodied but steady. He did not chase the retreating enemies. He did not need to. His message had been sent, his strength displayed. He turned his gaze back to Liana. Her legs threatened to give way beneath her, exhaustion clawing at her bones. She forced herself to stand straight, clutching the tree trunk at her side for support. She still held the echo of her note within her chest, still felt the way it had surged out of her, unstoppable once it began. It had been more than sound. It had been command. Marius's eyes swept over the unconscious wolf at her feet. "Sleep command," he said at last, his voice low, thoughtful, rare, effective. Liana said nothing, her throat too raw, her spirit too shaken. She could still feel the pull of her song inside her, the way it had reached out and bound another will. It frightened her as much as it had saved her. Matthias stepped closer, his golden gaze never leaving her. He stopped only a few paces away, his presence filling the air between them like a physical force. "You are more powerful than you realize," he said, "and more dangerous." Her hand tightened around the tree's bark. I am not dangerous. I only want to be left alone. And his expression hardened. That is no longer possible. The Eastern Pact saw you. Darius will know. He will come for you. You are already a target. Liana's breath caught. She had survived 12 years by being unseen, unheard, forgotten. And now, in one night, she had been exposed not only to the Alpha King, but to his enemies as well. Her sanctuary was gone. Her freedom was unraveling. I can disappear again, she said, though the words rang hollow even to her own ears. Matthias shook his head. Not from this. Darius has spies everywhere. He will find you. And when he does, he will use you in ways that will make you wish for death. Her stomach twisted at the cold certainty in his tone. He was not trying to frighten her. He was simply stating truth. So my choices, she whispered bitterly, are to be your prisoner or his. Not prisoner, Matthias corrected, his eyes holding hers with relentless intensity. Protected subject. There is a difference. Obviously. Her laugh was sharp, bitter. You threatened to kill me if I refused you. What kind of protection is that? For a moment, something unexpected flickered across his face, almost like regret. I was hasty, he admitted. Song magic is rare and often dangerous in untrained hands. I reacted to the potential threat, not to you. Liana's chest ached with confusion, fury, and exhaustion. She wanted to scream at him, to flee into the forest, to deny the chains she felt tightening around her. But deep down, she knew the truth. She could not run from this, not anymore. Matthias's gaze softened by a fraction, though the steel never left his voice. Come with me, to the capital, as my guest, not my prisoner. Learn to control your power. In return, I will protect you from Darius and his wolves. And if I refuse? His expression turned grave. Then you seal your own fate. The Eastern Alpha will find you, and when he does, there will be no mercy. It would find her. The forest was silent around them, save for the soft whisper of the river carrying away the blood of the fallen. Liana's heart pounded as she realized her world had collapsed in the space of a night. There was no path back to solitude. There was only forward into chains or into death. And for the first time, she wondered if perhaps the Alpha King's chains might not be as unyielding as she feared. The forest still reeked of blood. The bodies of the fallen lay broken in the undergrowth, steam rising faintly from their wounds in the cooling night air. Yet the danger was far from over. From the shadows beyond the tree line, fresh howls split the silence, low and guttural, vibrating through the earth itself. They were not cries of retreat, but of reinforcements. Liana gripped the tree at her side, her chest still burning from the force of her own song. Her knees threatened to give way beneath her, but she forced herself to remain upright, eyes darting toward the sound. She knew that howl, encirclement. They were not finished with her or with the Alpha King. They had come prepared, and this skirmish was only the beginning. Matthias stood a few paces ahead of her, tall and immovable, his golden eyes burning like twin suns in the dark. His stance was deceptively calm, but every line of his body radiated the tension of a predator on the verge of striking. He did not glance back at her. He did not need to. His voice, when it came, was steady and absolute. Stay behind me. The command wrapped around her like iron. Her instinct bristled against it. She had never obeyed orders from anyone since the night her pack was slaughtered. Yet something in his tone was impossible to deny. He did not ask. He did not plead. He commanded, as an alpha born to rule. The brush ahead rustled. Dark figures emerged one by one. Half-shifted wolves with claws glinting and teeth bared, their monstrous bodies caught between human cunning and beastly hunger. They moved with the silent coordination of hunters, spreading out to form a ring around their prey. Their eyes gleamed with cruel anticipation. At their head strode Kale, towering and savage, his jaw twisted with partial transformation, his voice a guttural growl. Did you think it would be so easy, Blackthorn? He sneered, his fangs flashing in the moonlight. We knew you would come for the voice. Darius knew. And now we will take her and your head as well. Matthias's posture did not change, though the fire in his eyes grew sharper. "You should have brought more men," he said, his voice like stone grinding against steel. Kael barked a laugh, though unease flickered in his expression. "You are outnumbered 6-1. Even you cannot fight an entire pack alone." His gaze shifted to Liana, lingering with cruel delight. "And what is this, the little bird who sings? She will make a fine prize for our alpha. Perhaps we will see what other songs she can sing when she is broken." Liana's stomach clenched, fear flaring into fury. Before she could speak, Matthias moved. It was not a shift. He remained in human form, but the power of his wolf burned through every motion. One moment he stood still. The next he was upon them, a storm of motion and strength. His fist shattered a jaw, his elbow cracked a rib cage, his knee drove into a stomach with bone-splintering force. He fought without hesitation, every strike measured for maximum destruction. The eastern wolves snarled and lunged, their claws raking through air, but Matthias was everywhere at once, his movements too swift, too precise. He was a predator born for war, and the forest became his battlefield. Liana's pulse thundered in her ears as she clutched her knife, watching the Alpha King carve through enemies with sheer will and power. Yet the wolves kept coming, and no matter how strong he was, numbers threatened to overwhelm him. One of the wolves broke from the fray, circling toward her. His yellow eyes fixed on her with vicious hunger, his claws gleaming as he lunged. Liana barely had time to raise her blade. He slammed into her with crushing force, sending her sprawling across the ground. The knife skittered from her grasp, lost in the leaves. His weight pinned her, his breath hot and fetid against her face as his claws pressed against her throat. Terror surged, cold and suffocating. She tried to twist free, but he was stronger, heavier. His mouth opened, fangs descending toward her flesh. Instinct took hold. Liana's mouth opened, and her voice burst forth not in words this time, but in melody. A song rose from her chest, fierce and wild, threaded with desperation and rage. It carried through the night air like fire through dry grass, vibrating with a power she had never dared to unleash. The wolf above her stiffened, his eyes rolling back. His body convulsed, his strength faltering. He collapsed to the side, unconscious before he hit the ground. Liana scrambled to her feet, her chest heaving, her throat raw from the effort. But the song did not stop. It poured from her in waves, rising higher, fiercer, filling the battlefield. The melody was no lullaby. It was a war song, ancient and primal, resonating with something older than time itself. The trees shuddered with its force, the river trembled, and every creature in the forest fell silent to listen. The effect was immediate. The eastern wolves faltered mid-strike, their movements sluggish, their snarls breaking into confusion. Their claws swiped through air as if dulled, their coordination crumbling beneath the weight of her melody. At the same time, the Western Alpha's men scattered along the riverbank, fighting back stragglers lifted their heads. Though they were too far to hear words, the song reached them, filling their limbs with renewed strength, their hearts with unyielding resolve. They fought harder, faster, as if the very rhythm of Liana's voice had joined their blood. At the center of it all, Matthias paused for the briefest moment. His golden eyes sought hers across the battlefield, and for an instant, the storm of combat held still. Recognition flared in his gaze. Not the cold recognition of power to be wielded, but the fierce acknowledgement of an equal, a partner, a force that stood beside him, not beneath him. Then the storm resumed. Matthias surged forward with renewed ferocity, striking down Kael's men with merciless precision. His movements became sharper, fueled by the resonance of her voice. He was not fighting alone anymore. Kael roared in fury, his monstrous form towering as he forced his way through the chaos. His claws slashed at Matthias, their impact sending sparks as steel met flesh. "She belongs to us," he snarled. "She belongs to no one," Matthias growled back, his fist crashing into Kael's jaw with the force of a hammer. Liana's song rose higher, carrying her rage and defiance. The melody wrapped around them like a shield, bending the battle's rhythm to her will. She sang of storms, of fire, of freedom long denied. She sang because silence had failed her, because solitude had betrayed her, because now her voice was the only weapon left. The eastern wolves broke beneath the tide. One by one they fell, retreating into the shadows of the forest, their howls fading into the distance. The ground was littered with the unconscious and the defeated, the river running crimson where blood had fallen. At last, Liana's voice faltered, the final notes fading into the still night. Her body swayed, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. She staggered, her vision blurring, her breath ragged. Strong arms caught her before she fell. The scent of pine and winter enveloped her, steady and grounding. Matthias lowered her gently to the earth, his golden eyes searching her pale face. "Breathe," he murmured, his voice softer than she had ever heard. "Just breathe. It will pass." Her head rested against his chest, her body trembling with fatigue. She forced air into her lungs, clinging to the sound of his voice as an anchor. Slowly, the world steadied, though weakness still weighed down every limb. Matthias's gaze burned with intensity as he studied her. "Extraordinary," he whispered as though speaking to himself. "I have never seen song magic wielded with such force." Liana's lips parted, her voice a hoarse whisper. "I did not mean to. It just happened." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his blood-stained hand unexpectedly gentle. "You saved us both," he said. "And you saved my men." The battlefield was silent now, the forest still. The war song had ended, but its echo lingered in the air, a reminder of the power that had been unleashed. Liana's life of silence was over. Her voice had changed everything. And in the Alpha King's golden gaze, she saw the truth. He would never let her go. The forest lay in uneasy silence. Smoke curled from extinguished torches, mingling with the metallic scent of blood that clung stubbornly to the air. The cries of the wounded had quieted, leaving only the distant rush of the Silver Moon River and the faint rustle of leaves stirred by a night wind. Liana sat on the cold ground, her back against the trunk of a fallen tree, her entire body trembling. The war song still echoed inside her chest, though her throat felt raw and scraped clean, every breath painful. Her voice had not simply been sound, it had been power, wild and merciless, tearing through her with a force that left her hollow. She had not meant to unleash it, but once begun, it had consumed her until the last note had left her lips. Her gaze drifted to the battlefield. Bodies lay strewn across the forest floor, some unconscious, some unmoving. The eastern wolves who had attacked lay broken in the shadows, their retreat cut short by their own defeat. Of Kale there was no sign. He had vanished into the darkness, leaving his fallen behind. Matthias stood not far from her, his figure outlined in silver moonlight, a towering silhouette among ruin. His soldiers moved with disciplined efficiency around him, tending to the wounded, dragging away the enemy dead, reforging order from chaos. Yet, even amidst the storm's aftermath, the Alpha King radiated calm control. His cloak was torn, his hands stained with blood, his knuckles bruised and split, but he stood tall, unbent. When his golden eyes turned toward her, she felt the weight of them, like a touch. He crossed the ground in measured steps, the forest itself seeming to part for him. He stopped before her, his presence vast and unrelenting. "You understand now," he said, his voice low, threaded with steel. Liana's throat tightened. "Understand what?" she whispered hoarsely. "That you cannot remain here. Not anymore." His gaze swept the shadows where enemy wolves had melted away. "Darius's men have seen you. They will carry word back to him, and when they do, he will not rest until he has you. You are no longer hidden, you are no longer safe." The words struck her like blows. She had known it already, in the deepest part of herself, but to hear it spoken aloud by the Alpha King made it real. The sanctuary she had carved for herself in silence and solitude had been shattered beyond repair. She was exposed, hunted. Her hands curled into fists in the folds of her cloak. "I can run," she said, though the words felt weak. "I have survived 12 years alone. I can vanish again. Matthias crouched before her, lowering himself so his eyes met hers directly. In the moonlight, they glowed with unwavering intensity. You cannot outrun this, he said. Darius will find you. He has spies in every settlement, scouts in every forest. He will scent your power. Follow it until you are cornered. Alone, you will not survive him. Liana's breath caught, her chest tightening with panic and fury. So what are you telling me? That I must choose between being your captive or his? Something flickered across Matthias's expression, anger, but not at her. His voice dropped to a growl. Not captive, protected. You will come with me to the capital. You will be given training, shelter, a place among my people. Under my protection, Darius will not dare take you. Her laugh was sharp, bitter, torn from the ragged edge of despair. Protection. You threatened to kill me if I refused you. That is not protection. That is control. Chains dressed as kindness. For a moment, silence stretched between them. The night pressed close, heavy with the scent of blood and pine. Then, to her surprise, his expression softened, just slightly, just enough to reveal the man beneath the legend. I was hasty, Matthias admitted. The words sounded strange, as though rarely spoken by a man so used to being obeyed. Song magic is rare and dangerous in the wrong hands. My first thought was the threat you posed, not the person before me. That was an error. Liana blinked, startled by the confession. The Alpha King was not known for humility. His reputation was one of iron certainty, of cold command. Yet here he was, offering her what almost felt like an apology. Her voice shook when she answered. And now? What am I to you now? Matthias's golden eyes held hers without wavering. You are the key to more than you know. Your voice can heal, can strengthen, can destroy. It is a weapon if wielded, yes, but it is also a gift. I will not waste it. I will not waste you. Honestly, his words should have terrified her, should have solidified every fear her mother had instilled. Yet something in his tone made her hesitate. It was not greed she heard, nor the cold hunger of conquest, but something sharper, more complex. Pragmatism, yes. Curiosity, undeniably. And perhaps a strange kind of respect. Liana shook her head, her throat aching. I never asked for this. I never wanted this. I only wanted to live in peace. Matthias rose, his shadow falling across her. Peace is no longer yours to have. Whether you wish it or not, the world has turned its eyes to you. You can choose to face it with me, or you can face it alone, and alone you will die. The words hung in the air like a final judgment. Liana's chest heaved with unsteady breaths as she struggled with the weight of choice. For 12 years, her life had been silence, solitude, hiding in shadows where no one could touch her. But that silence had been broken, and no amount of denial could return her to the safety she had lost. The forest stirred faintly, a cold wind sweeping through, carrying the distant cry of wolves. Liana shivered, pulling her cloak tighter around her shoulders. She sought then the truth in his words. Darius would not stop. He would send more, stronger, until she was found. And when that day came, she would not have the Alpha King standing between her and the slaughter. Her gaze lifted to Matthias, his golden eyes unblinking, steady as firelight. He had threatened her, commanded her, frightened her. But he had also fought for her, shielded her, spoken truth when he could have spoken lies. She could not trust him fully, not yet, but she could not deny that he was her only chance at survival. Slowly, with a weight that felt like chains settling around her shoulders, Liana whispered, If I go with you, it will be by my choice, not by your command. My voice is mine. My song belongs to me. Not to you, not to your crown, not to your kingdom. For a long moment, Matthias was silent. Then, to her astonishment, he inclined his head. Your voice is your own, he agreed, though steel lingered beneath the words. But understand this, when the kingdom calls, you will answer. Not for me, but for the people who will depend on you. Liana closed her eyes, her throat raw with unshed tears. She thought of her mother's last words, of fire and blood, of silence that had become a prison. She thought of her song unleashed at last, and the way it had filled her with both terror and release. When she opened her eyes again, the decision was made. Then I will go with you, she said quietly. Matthias's expression did not change, but his gaze burned brighter, victory glinting in his golden eyes. So be it, he said. At dawn, we leave for the capital. The words sealed her fate. Liana drew her cloak tighter, staring into the darkness where Chaol had vanished. Darius would not rest. He would come. And when he did, the silence she had lived in for 12 years would seem like nothing compared to the storm that awaited. Yet even as fear coiled in her chest, another feeling stirred, fragile and uncertain. For the first time in years, she was not alone. And that, more than anything, terrified her. The moon lingered low in the sky, heavy and watchful, as Liana sat in the hollow of her shelter for what she knew would be the final time. The walls of earth and timber, once her shield, now felt like a tomb. Every line of stone, every dried herb hanging from the ceiling, every mark carved by her hands carried the weight of 12 years of solitude. She had fought, wept, and endured here. She had buried her voice here, and now she was leaving it all behind. She touched the small wooden box that held her mother's pendant, the book of healing lore, and the remnants of her past. These and her knife and her cloak were all she would carry. Everything else she abandoned to the forest that had sheltered her and betrayed her in equal measure. When she stepped outside, dawn was only a faint smear of silver on the horizon. Mist clung to the ground, curling through the roots of trees like restless spirits. At the edge of the clearing, Matthias stood waiting. His broad frame cloaked in shadow, his soldiers gathered beyond him in disciplined silence. He looked as though he had not moved since the battle ended, as though the night itself had held him rooted to the earth. Their gazes met, and though no words passed, the weight of what was coming pressed between them. Liana crossed the clearing slowly, every step dragging with the weight of farewell. She stopped at the river's edge, crouching down to let the cold water run across her fingertips one last time. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "for keeping me safe, for holding my secrets." The river babbled on, indifferent to her gratitude, carrying her words away as it had once carried her song. When she rose, Matthias was closer, his golden eyes steady on her. "You have decided," he said, not as a question, but as fact. Liana nodded once, her voice steady despite the storm within her. "I will go with you, but on one condition." A faint glimmer of curiosity flickered across his face. "Speak." "My voice is mine," she said firmly, her eyes never leaving his. "My song belongs to me alone. I will not be used as a weapon to bend others to your will. I will not have my gift turned into chains." Silence fell between them. The forest itself seemed to lean closer, listening. Matthias studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, the golden fire of his gaze unblinking. She feared he would laugh, or rage, or remind her of her helplessness. But instead, he inclined his head, just slightly, in acknowledgement. "Your voice is your own," he said. "But you live in my world now, and in that world there will be times when your gift may serve not me, but the people who look to me for protection. Understand this, Liana, I do not collect weapons. I gather what is rare and valuable so that it will not be wasted. Your voice is no different." His words were not the reassurance she had longed for, but they were a concession, and she recognized the weight of that concession. This was a man unaccustomed to compromise, a king who commanded obedience and received it without question. That he acknowledged her boundary at all was a gesture of respect. She accepted it, not because it satisfied her, but because it was the best she would be given. "Then we have an agreement," she said softly. Matthias's mouth curved into something faintly resembling a smile, though it did not warm his eyes. "We do." The soldiers mounted their steeds, their black and silver armor gleaming dully in the gray light of morning. Horses stamped impatiently, snorting clouds of mist into the chill air. Matthias motioned to one of his captains, who brought forward a spare mount, a tall chestnut with calm eyes and a strong build. Liana hesitated. She had not ridden in 12 years, not since the night she had fled flames and blood on trembling legs, urged by her mother's final words. Yet when Matthias held the reins toward her, she forced herself to accept them. The leather was rough beneath her fingers, the horse warm and steady. She swung into the saddle, her body stiff, unfamiliar muscles protesting. Matthias mounted his great black steed with effortless grace, his presence on horseback as commanding as it was on the ground. He took his place at the front of the column, his soldiers falling in behind him like the flowing of a river around stone. The gates of her solitude closed behind her as the company began to ride. The journey into the forest was slow at first, the horses navigating narrow trails beneath towering trees. Liana kept her head high, though every rustle of leaves, every shift of shadow set her nerves alight. She had lived in these woods so long that each sound spoke a language to her. Now, for the first time, she was not their mistress, but their exile. Matthias rode beside her, his posture straight, his golden eyes scanning the trees with the vigilance of a predator. He did not speak, and she did not ask him to. Yet his presence beside her was both unsettling and grounding. She hated how her pulse responded to him, hated how his nearness felt less like threat and more like shield. She told herself it was instinct, nothing more, the wolf in her recognizing the power of an alpha. But deep down, she knew it was not only that. By midday, the forest began to change. The deep wilds she had called home gave way to broader paths, to signs of travel she had long avoided. The scents of strangers lingered here, faint traces of hunters, merchants, wanderers. The world beyond her solitude pressed closer, and she felt the cage of silence she had lived in crumble further with each step. As they paused to rest the horses, Liana dismounted stiffly, her legs trembling from the unfamiliar strain. She moved away from the soldiers, drawing near the riverbank where it curved beside their path. Kneeling, she splashed cold water on her face, staring at her reflection rippling in the current. Her eyes, amber and untamed, stared back at her. For the first time in years, she looked not like a ghost, but like a woman standing on the edge of something she could not yet name. Behind her, Matthias approached. His steps were silent, but she felt him before she heard him. His presence pressed against her awareness, undeniable as the pull of the moon. "You are not trained," he said, his voice even, without judgment. "And yet, you wielded your gift with power enough to shift the tide of battle. That is no accident. It is blood. It is instinct. It will only grow stronger the more you use it." Liana rose slowly, turning to face him. "And you mean to teach me?" His golden eyes met hers. Unwavering. "Not I. There are others better suited. In the capital, you will be guided. Your voice will be shaped, honed. If you resist it, it will consume you. If you embrace it, you will control it." Her jaw tightened. "And what if I do not want control? What if I want silence again?" Something flickered across his expression, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "You sang," he said. "Not because you were forced, but because you could not stop yourself. Silence will no longer hold you. You know this as well as I." The truth in his words cut through her denial. She wanted to refute him, but she remembered the way the melody had surged through her, unstoppable once it began, as though it had waited 12 years for release. She said nothing. Matthias studied her for a moment longer, then inclined his head toward the waiting soldiers. "We ride." They mounted again, and the journey continued. The path grew wider, the signs of civilization stronger. Liana felt the eyes of the soldiers on her when they thought she did not see. Curiosity mingled with wariness. To them, she was a stranger who had stepped from legend, a song mage, untrained, unbound, standing at their king's side. And though she sat tall in the saddle, her spine straight, her heart ached with the weight of what she had lost. She glanced back once, through the thinning trees, toward the wilds she had called home. Already the forest seemed distant, its secrets swallowed in mist. She turned away before the ache could hollow her further. By the time the sun dipped low again, painting the world in amber and fire, Liana understood that her life of solitude was gone forever. Whatever awaited her in the capital chains or freedom, exile, or belonging, she could not turn back. And beside her, the Alpha King rode with quiet certainty, as though he had known from the moment he heard her voice that this was how it would end. The morning broke with a pale sky, light spilling across the forest canopy in soft hues of silver and rose. Birds called tentatively, their songs weaving through the branches in hesitant chorus, as though testing the world after the violence of the night before. Liana rode in silence, the steady gait of the chestnut beneath her, a rhythm that echoed the slow, relentless march of time. She had not ridden a horse since she was a child, yet the movements came back to her with surprising familiarity, her body recalling what her mind had long buried. The soldiers formed a disciplined column, their black and silver armor gleaming faintly in the dawn. They did not chatter or jest as she had once imagined soldiers might. Their silence was purposeful, efficient, the silence of men and women trained to move as a single body. Every so often, a scout would break from the line, vanishing into the trees before returning with a sharp nod, reporting unseen dangers or the absence of them. At the head rode Matthias Blackthorn. His black steed moved with controlled power, its massive frame steady and sure over root and stone. The Alpha King's posture was straight, his cloak trailing behind him in dark folds, his golden eyes scanning the horizon with ceaseless vigilance. Even when he did not speak, his presence commanded every man and woman who followed. He did not need to remind them of discipline. His existence was reminder enough. Liana kept her gaze forward, though she could feel the soldiers' eyes on her in stolen glances. She was a stranger to them, yet no ordinary stranger. Her song had already spread through their ranks like wildfire. They had felt it in their bones the night before, when their king might have fallen, when the tide of battle might have shifted against them until her voice had risen. She knew what they saw when they looked at her. Not Liana, the woman who had lived in silence for 12 years, but the song mage who had stood at the side of their king. The thought sat heavy on her chest. She had never wanted to be seen, had built her life around invisibility. Now, even before she reached the capital, she was already something else, something dangerous, something whispered about in awe and suspicion alike. By midday, the sun rose high, filtering in golden shafts through the canopy. The company paused in a clearing to water the horses and rest. Liana dismounted stiffly, her legs aching from the unfamiliar motion, and led her horse to the stream that cut through the clearing. The animal lowered its head to drink, its ears flicking back and forth as it adjusted to the scents of wolves and steel. Liana knelt at the water's edge, cupping her hands to bring the cold stream to her lips. The liquid was sharp and clean, chasing the dryness from her throat, soothing the ache left by song. She stared at her reflection, wavering in the water, wild amber eyes framed by chestnut hair, skin darkened by sun and solitude. She did not recognize the woman who stared back. She looked like someone pulled from legend. Not the frightened girl who had once fled fire with nothing but her mother's final command ringing in her ears. A shadow fell over her, and she glanced up to find Matthias standing behind her. He had dismounted as well, though even on the ground he seemed taller than any other, his presence dominating the space as effortlessly as the sun commanded the day. He said nothing at first, only watched her with those sharp, unyielding eyes. "You ride well," he said at last, his tone even, without mockery, for one who has not ridden in years. Liana dipped her hands back into the stream, letting the water run over her fingers. "I remember enough," she said quietly. "Memory is not enough to survive," he replied, "but instinct that is harder to kill." His words stirred something in her chest, something she did not wish to examine. She kept her gaze on the water. "Why do you watch me so closely?" she asked. "Do you fear I will run?" Matthias tilted his head slightly, his golden gaze never wavering. "If you meant to run, you would have done so already. No, I watch you because you are dangerous and because you are not yet aware of how dangerous you are." Her jaw tightened. "I am not dangerous. I only wanted silence." "And yet your silence broke into song." His voice lowered, resonant as thunder, and that song shifted the course of battle. You cannot deny what you are, Liana. The moment you sang, you chose to become more than the ghost you had been. Her throat ached at his words, not from defiance, but from the truth of them. She had not chosen, not truly, but she had sung, and the world had changed. She stood abruptly, brushing the water from her hands, her cloak whipping about her legs. You speak as if I wanted this. I did not. Matthias studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable, then inclined his head. Want has nothing to do with it. Power does not ask permission to exist. It simply does. The question now is whether you will command it or whether it will command you. Before she could respond, one of the soldiers approached, bowing his head to the Alpha King. The path ahead is clear, my lord. No sign of Eastern scouts within the next mile. Matthias nodded once. We ride. The company mounted again, and the journey continued. By nightfall, they reached a sheltered valley where the trees thinned and the air grew colder. Fires were lit, tents raised with efficient precision. Liana sat apart from the others, her back against a boulder, watching the flames cast shadows across the soldiers' faces. They did not come near her, though their eyes strayed often in her direction. Fear or reverence, she could not tell. She pulled her cloak tighter around herself, exhaustion gnawing at her bones. She longed for the solitude of her shelter, for the quiet companionship of the river. But those days were gone, buried in ash and blood and song. When the camp quieted, Matthias approached. He did not sit too close, but near enough that the warmth of the fire illuminated the sharp lines of his face, casting his golden eyes into molten light. For a while he said nothing, and the silence between them stretched taut. At last his voice broke it, quiet but firm. You will not return to silence, Liana. That life is gone. The only question now is whether you will allow yourself to become what you are meant to be. Her chest tightened, tears threatening but unshed. And what am I meant to be? She whispered. He regarded her steadily, his expression unreadable. We will see. The fire crackled between them, the flames bending low as if listening. Liana turned her face away, staring into the darkness beyond the circle of light. The night seemed vast and endless, the shadows deep and full of watching eyes. She shivered, pulling her cloak close, and wondered what awaited her at the end of this path. The capital loomed ahead, unseen but inevitable, and with it a future she had not chosen. The second night of the journey was colder than the first. A thin wind crept down from the northern peaks, threading through the valley where the company had made camp. The flames of the central fire struggled against the drafts, sparks rising only to be carried away into the vast darkness. Tents stood in neat rows, soldiers moving quietly among them, their discipline so precise it seemed ritual. Liana sat alone near the edge of the fire's circle, her knees drawn to her chest, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The chestnut mare grazed nearby, tethered to a stake, its calm movements the only softness in a camp otherwise bristling with steel. Liana's eyes lingered on the flames, but her mind was far from them. Sleep had eluded her the night before, and it eluded her again now. Her body was weary, but her thoughts chased themselves in endless circles. The memory of her voice rising on the battlefield haunted her, the weight of power she had not meant to release, the way it had poured from her as if it had always been waiting. It terrified her more than the Eastern wolves had. That song had not been born of control, it had been born of desperation. And desperation was no shield against the dangers of what she carried inside. The murmur of soldiers drifted across camp, muted and respectful, but no one approached her. They looked at her when they thought she would not notice curiosity, awe, suspicion, even fear flickering in their eyes. She could almost feel the whispers building, the stories that would follow her to the capital long before she arrived. Song mage, witch, weapon. She had tried for 12 years to be invisible, and now invisibility was gone forever. A presence stirred the air beside her, heavy and unmistakable. She knew it before she looked up. Matthias. He lowered himself to the ground a measured distance from her, close enough that the firelight gilded his sharp features, but far enough that he did not intrude upon the fragile wall she held between them. He sat with the casual strength of a predator at rest, shoulders straight, every motion deliberate. His golden eyes reflected the flames, molten and watchful. "You do not sleep," he said quietly. Liana's fingers tightened around the edge of her cloak. "Neither do you." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of fire and the restless wind. Then Matthias inclined his head, acknowledging her words. "I have not slept easily in many years," he admitted. The confession startled her. She turned her gaze to him, but his expression revealed nothing, his features carved from stone and shadow. He looked toward the flames as if he had not spoken at all. "Why?" she asked before she could stop herself. His golden eyes slid back to hers, steady and unblinking. "Because I am Alpha King," he said simply. "A ruler cannot afford the luxury of deep sleep. Too much depends on vigilance." The answer was true, but Liana sensed something beneath it, something unspoken. The way his jaw tightened as he said it, the faint shadow that crossed his face, spoke of burdens heavier than duty alone. She wanted to press him, to pry at the cracks, but she forced herself to hold her tongue. Instead, he shifted the weight of the conversation. "You sang because you could not bear silence," he said, his voice quiet but edged with certainty. Liana's chest tightened. "You do not know that." "I know enough," he countered. "Song magic does not rise from nothing. It answers to the heart. Grief, longing, rage. The stronger the feeling, the stronger the song. Your voice was powerful because it carried years of silence within it. You broke, and the song was your breaking." Her throat burned at his words. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself, glaring into the flames. "And what would you know of silence?" The question was sharp, meant to wound, but Matthias did not flinch. Instead, he regarded her with that unnerving steadiness that made her feel as though he could see beneath her skin. "More than you imagine," he said. Something flickered in his golden gaze then, something raw and unguarded that startled her more than any threat. He looked away, his eyes tracing the fire as though seeing not flames but memories. His voice was softer when he spoke again. "When I was air, I was sent into solitude for training. Days, weeks, sometimes months. To break me, to strip away weakness, to teach me that an alpha stands alone when all others fall." Liana's breath caught. She had not expected this glimpse beneath the armor of command. She studied him in silence, trying to reconcile the ruthless king she had feared with a man who now spoke of isolation not unlike her own. "It was not 12 years, Matthias continued, his tone sharpening with controlled restraint, but it was enough to understand what silence does to the soul. It is not peace. It is a hollow that gnaws until nothing is left but survival." His words settled into her like stones in a riverbed, heavy and unshakable. For the first time, she felt the faint echo of kinship, different lives, different scars, but born of the same wound. She turned her gaze back to the fire, her voice low. "I did not sing to be found. I sang because I thought I would break if I did not. It was only one song. I never meant it to travel. I never meant..." Her throat closed around the words. "You did not mean for me to hear it," Matthias finished for her. Liana nodded, unable to meet his gaze. For a long moment, silence lay between them again. But it was no longer the heavy silence of strangers. It was the silence of shared understanding, fragile and unfamiliar. At last, Matthias spoke again, his voice steady. "Your song was no accident. It was not weakness, it was strength. The Eastern Pack fled because of you. My men lived because of you. Whatever you believe, you are no longer a shadow hiding in trees. You are part of something larger now." Liana's eyes burned, though no tears fell. She wanted to reject his words, to retreat back into denial. But deep down, she knew he was right. The song was out. The silence was broken. There was no turning back. She drew her cloak tighter and forced her voice to steadiness. And what if I refuse to be part of it? What if I want no kingdom, no crown, no battles? What if I want only to disappear? Matthias's golden eyes fixed on her, unwavering. Then you will disappear into Darius's chains instead of mine. You have seen enough to know that is truth. You cannot run from power once it has been revealed. You can only decide who will stand beside you when it comes. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks upward. Liana's heart pounded, torn between fury and reluctant acceptance. She hated him for being right. She hated herself for knowing it. She looked at him then, really looked at the man who had shattered her solitude, who had threatened her, who had shielded her. He was not kind, he was not merciful, but he was honest, and in honesty she found a strange, dangerous comfort. For the first time since leaving her forest, she allowed herself to exhale. Matthias inclined his head slightly, as though acknowledging something in her expression. Rest, he said softly. Tomorrow will test you more than today. He rose, his shadow stretching long across the firelight, and left her alone again. Liana stared into the flames until her vision blurred, her body heavy with exhaustion, and though sleep still eluded her, the silence of the night no longer felt entirely her own. The night had settled heavy and quiet over the valley. The fires had burned low, throwing faint circles of light into the dark. Soldiers slept in disciplined silence, their weapons always within reach, while sentries kept watch along the perimeter, their shadows flickering against the trees. Liana sat wrapped in her cloak, her back pressed to a boulder, her gaze fixed on the sky above. Stars glittered coldly between the shifting branches, indifferent to the world below. Sleep would not come. Her body ached from the ride, her throat from the song she had forced into existence, but her mind would not rest. The future pressed against her with suffocating weight, too close, too inevitable. A sudden rustle drew her attention. She lifted her head, scanning the tree line, her heart quickening. The sentry nearest her did not stir. The fire crackled softly, masking the faintest sound. Perhaps it was only an animal. She told herself this, tried to believe it. But the forest had been too quiet all evening. The silence was not natural. It was waiting. Her instincts screamed a heartbeat before the attack began. From the darkness, wolves burst forth, half-shifted monstrosities, claws gleaming, eyes burning with hunger. Their snarls shattered the night, their bodies colliding with the guards on the perimeter in a storm of teeth and steel. Chaos erupted. Shouts rose, steel clashed, horses screamed as they fought their tethers. The camp exploded into motion, soldiers springing awake, blades drawn, shields lifted. The fire roared as if startled into life, throwing wild shadows across the battlefield. Liana staggered to her feet, her pulse hammering. Fear gripped her throat, but instinct moved her faster than thought. She snatched up her knife, holding it tight, though she knew steel would never be enough against the tide of wolves pouring into camp. Through the chaos, she saw him. Matthias Blackthorn was already in motion, a dark storm at the heart of the battlefield. His cloak flew behind him as his fists and blade cut down enemies with lethal precision. He did not hesitate, did not falter, moving as though the battle had been waiting for him all along. His golden eyes glowed in the firelight, sharp and merciless, his wolf thrumming just beneath his skin. "Eastern Pack," he snarled, his voice carrying even over the clash of battle. "Defend the camp!" His soldiers rallied instantly, moving to his command as though his words alone bound their strength. They formed a line, shields braced, blades flashing in the firelight. But the enemy was many, more than before, and they came with ruthless intent. Liana backed away, her heart a wild drum in her chest. One of the wolves broke free from the melee, charging straight toward her. His claws tore into the earth, his half-formed muzzle curled in a snarl. She raised her knife, but terror froze her limbs. She had seen what these creatures could do, seen their strength, their cruelty. The wolf lunged, then collapsed mid-stride, Matthias's blade buried in his chest. The Alpha King wrenched it free in a single motion, turning his burning gaze on her. "Stay close," he ordered. But even as he turned away, another wolf slipped through the fray, lunging for her from the other side. She spun, knife slashing, the blade cutting shallow across his arm. He snarled, fury in his eyes, and struck again. His claws grazed her cheek, burning like fire as blood welled. She stumbled back, breath ragged, knowing she could not hold him off. Her throat ached, her chest burned. She remembered the battlefield by the river, remembered the way her voice had surged out of her, unstoppable. She feared it, but she feared death more. The wolf lunged again. Liana opened her mouth. The sound that rose was raw, fierce, threaded with terror and defiance. A note that cracked through the night like lightning, vibrating with power, it struck the wolf head-on. His eyes widened, his body shuddered, and he crumpled to the ground, unconscious before he hit the dirt. The note did not fade. It grew, swelling into melody, ancient and wild. It poured from her throat, with the force of years buried in silence, a song of battle and blood. The camp itself seemed to vibrate with its resonance. The eastern wolves faltered, their snarls breaking, their claws faltering. Confusion spread through their ranks, their strength unraveling as if her song had stripped it away. At the same time, the western soldiers surged forward, their eyes bright, their blades striking with renewed vigor. Her song filled them, lending their limbs new strength, their hearts unyielding resolve. Where they had wavered, they now stood firm. Where they had faltered, they now pushed the enemy back. At the center of it all, Matthias paused. His golden eyes found hers across the battlefield. For the briefest moment, his relentless fury softened. Recognition burned between them, not of weapon and wielder, not of king and subject, but of something deeper. He had seen her power, and he knew it for what it was. Not a tool, not a cage, a force born of her will. Then the storm swept him again. He roared, his voice cutting through the clash of steel, and drove his soldiers forward, carving through the enemy with deadly precision. Liana's song rose higher, carrying her fear, her rage, her desperate need to live. It wrapped around the camp like a shield, bending the rhythm of battle to her will. Eastern wolves staggered, retreating under the tide of her melody. One by one they fell, until at last the survivors melted back into the trees, their howls fading into the night. The camp fell into ragged silence. The fire crackled, soldiers panted, horses stamped nervously. The ground was littered with blood and bodies, but the threat had passed. Liana's song faltered, the final notes breaking apart as exhaustion crashed over her. She swayed, her vision swimming, the world tilting. Strong arms caught her. She knew the scent before she saw him: pine, steel, and something sharper, uniquely his. Matthias lowered her gently to the ground, his gaze fixed on her pale face. "Breathe," he murmured, his voice low but steady. "Stay with me." Her chest heaved, her throat raw, her limbs trembling with weakness. She clung to his voice, the anchor it offered, and slowly the world steadied. She opened her eyes to find his golden gaze locked on her, intense and unyielding. "You saved them," he said, his voice carrying both wonder and certainty. "Without you, many would be dead. Without you, perhaps even I." Liana tried to speak, but her throat was too raw. Instead, she shook her head weakly, the motion small, desperate. Matthias's expression hardened. "Do not deny it. You turned the tide. Darius sent these wolves to end me, and they failed because of you." His words struck her like a stone. She wanted to deny them, to retreat into silence, but she could not. She had felt it too. Her song had shifted the battle, had saved them all. Matthias brushed a strand of hair from her face, his bloodied hand unexpectedly gentle. "You are more than you believe, Liana. More than you allow yourself to be." Her heart thudded weakly in her chest, torn between fear and something she could not name. She looked into his golden eyes and saw no lie there, only truth, truth that terrified her more than any enemy ever could. The silence of 12 years was gone forever. The fire had burned low, its flames reduced to glowing embers that pulsed softly in the dark. The camp smelled of blood and iron, of smoke and sweat, of battle that lingered long after the last cry had faded. The soldiers moved with weary discipline, tending to the wounded, cleaning blades, dragging the dead to the edges of the clearing. The sounds of steel against steel and murmured orders filled the night, steady and somber. Liana sat wrapped in her cloak, her body trembling with exhaustion. Her throat ached, raw from the force of the song she had unleashed, and her limbs felt as though they had been drained of all strength. The world still seemed to hum faintly around her, the echo of her voice vibrating through the very air. It frightened her, that echo, that reminder of what she had become when she sang. Her gaze drifted across the camp. Soldiers glanced at her when they thought she was not looking, their eyes sharp with awe, suspicion, even fear. She could feel the whispers already forming, unspoken yet heavy in the air. They had seen what she could do. They had felt it in their blood when their limbs had found new strength, when the tide of battle had turned. They would not forget. A shadow moved toward her, large and unmistakable. Matthias. He crouched beside her, his dark cloak brushing the ground, his golden eyes sharp and steady even in the dim light. His hands bore the stains of battle, his knuckles split, but his expression was calm, contained. He studied her face for a long moment, as if measuring more than wounds. "You are pale," he said at last. His voice carried no judgment, only observation. Liana tightened her cloak around herself. "I am tired." "You poured more of yourself into that song than you realized," he said. His tone was low, almost gentle, though his gaze remained hard. "It is not a power you can wield lightly. It drains more than your body. It drains your soul." Her throat constricted at his words because she knew they were true. She had felt it, the way the melody had consumed her, the way it had left her hollow, trembling. "I had no choice," she whispered. Matthias's eyes did not waver. "You made the right choice. Without you, we would be dead." The bluntness of his words struck her harder than any praise. She looked away, her gaze fixed on the embers. "I do not want to be their weapon. I do not want them to look at me like that." "They will look at you as they must," Matthias said, his voice steady. "With respect, with fear, with awe. It does not matter what they call it. What matters is what you choose to do with their gaze." Liana's jaw tightened. "You speak as if I have any choice left." His silence lingered before he answered. "You have more choice than you believe." She turned to him then, frustration burning in her chest. "And what choice would you give me? You cornered me in my own forest. You told me I could either serve you or die. That is not choice, that is command." For the first time, something shifted in his gaze. A flicker of regret, faint but unmistakable. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I told you I was hasty. I saw power and thought only of control. That was a mistake." The words unsettled her more than his threats ever had. An alpha king who admitted fault was a rare thing. His honesty disarmed her, left her unsteady in ways she could not explain. She shook her head, her voice raw. "I do not know how to trust you." Matthias's golden eyes softened by a fraction. "You do not need to trust me. Not yet. But know this. If I meant to break you, I would have done it already. Instead, I stand here asking you to stand beside me." Her breath caught, her heart thudding unevenly. She wanted to hate him, to see only the tyrant she had feared, the king who collected what was valuable for his crown. But there was more in his words, something steadier, something truer. He did not speak to her as a tool. He spoke to her as though she were an equal in a battle. Neither of them could fight alone. The silence between them grew taut, filled with unspoken things. The fire's glow flickered across his face, softening the harsh edges, casting light into the depths of his eyes. For a moment, Liana thought she saw not the Alpha King, but the man beneath the one who had known silence, who carried burdens he did not voice, who understood the hollow ache of loneliness. Her throat ached as she whispered, "I did not sing for you. I sang because I had no choice." "I know," Matthias said. His voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. "That is why it mattered." The words stole her breath. She turned her gaze back to the embers, afraid of what she might see if she looked into his eyes too long. For a while, neither spoke. Around them, the camp settled into uneasy calm, soldiers lying down to rest, the fires dying lower. The forest beyond stretched vast and watchful, every shadow a reminder of the threat still looming. At last, Matthias rose to his feet. "Rest," he said, his voice resuming its steady, commanding tone. "We move at dawn." I think full induction of that. Liana nodded faintly, though sleep still felt impossible. He lingered a moment longer, as though he might say more, then turned and strode back through the camp, his dark cloak trailing like the shadow of a storm. Liana watched him go, her heart heavy with confusion. She wanted to believe nothing had changed, that he was still the tyrant who had stolen her freedom, but part of her knew the truth. Something had shifted. A fragile thread had been woven between them, as dangerous as it was undeniable. She closed her eyes, listening to the crackle of embers and the distant murmur of soldiers. And though fear still clung to her, she felt the faintest flicker of something she had not known in 12 years. Not trust, not safety, but the possibility of both. The third dawn broke clear and cold, the sky a pale canvas streaked with rose and silver. The company rode steadily, their pace relentless but measured, the rhythm of hooves a drumbeat carrying them ever closer to the world. Liana had spent 12 years avoiding. She rode near the center of the column, the chestnut mare steady beneath her, its breathing calm and unhurried despite the distance they had already traveled. The forest had begun to change. The wild, tangled undergrowth of her sanctuary gave way to broader paths, to trees spaced farther apart, to signs of human passage she had not seen in years. Wagon ruts scarred the dirt road, faint but undeniable. Here and there, crude markers carved into trees hinted at boundaries claimed by villages or travelers. The air itself smelled different, less wild, tinged faintly with smoke and iron. Civilization was close, though unseen. Liana kept her head high, her cloak drawn close, though every sound, every scent set her nerves on edge. She had built her life on silence, on vanishing into the shadows. Now surrounded by the noise of soldiers and the inevitability of their destination, she felt stripped bare. The thought of people's eyes upon her, curious and judging, pressed against her chest like stone. Matthias rode at the head of the column, his black steed moving with fluid strength. His cloak streamed behind him, his presence commanding as ever. He did not look back, but she felt his awareness nonetheless, like a tether stretched invisibly between them. He was not a man who needed to watch to know. His wolf carried knowledge in every breath of wind, every shift in the earth. By midday, the forest thinned further. The path widened until it became a road, and along its edges appeared low stone walls, half crumbled but still marking old borders. Liana's eyes lingered on them with something between awe and dread. She had not seen such signs of men since childhood. Each stone seemed a monument to the world she had left behind. When the company paused to rest the horses, Liana dismounted stiffly, her legs aching. She moved toward the wall, tracing her fingers over the weathered stone. Moss clung to it, roots pushing through its cracks, yet the structure endured, like memory, like scars. Matthias's shadow fell over her, and she knew he had approached without needing to turn. His voice came low, carrying only to her. "It unsettles you." Liana kept her gaze on the wall. "I lived without these for 12 years. To see them again feels like stepping into a dream I should have left behind." "It is no dream," Matthias said. "It is your world, whether you accept it or not." Her throat tightened. "My world burned 12 years ago." There was a silence then, heavy and unspoken. At last, Matthias said, "And yet you live. That means you still have a place in it." She turned to him, her amber eyes burning. "And you think that place is in your capital, at your side, among courtiers and soldiers who will see me as nothing but a tool?" His golden gaze did not waver. "I think that place is where you choose to make it. But the capital will give you what the forest cannot. Safety, training, purpose. You can hate me for dragging you there, but do not mistake my intent. I will not let Darius have you." Her breath caught at the sharp certainty in his tone. He spoke not as a king bargaining, but as a predator promising truth. And though it terrified her, some part of her believed him. They mounted again, and the journey pressed onward. The road curved along a ridge, and when they crested its rise, Liana's breath faltered. The land before her spread wide and open, no longer forest, but rolling fields and scattered farms. Smoke curled from chimneys in the distance, faint shouts carried on the wind, the clatter of tools on stone. Beyond it all, faint on the horizon, she saw the silhouette of walls. High walls, massive and unyielding, crowning a rise of hills, and above those walls, like a black crown upon the earth, rose towers of stone. The capital, Blackthorn. Her chest tightened, a weight pressing against her ribs. She had imagined it in her years of solitude, fortresses built of stories, whispers carried by travelers she had once glimpsed before she vanished again. But imagination had not prepared her for the sheer scale. The walls stretched for miles, their height dwarfing the landscape, the towers rising like the teeth of some ancient beast. Smoke and banners curled into the sky, the faint clang of bells and hammers carrying even this far. It was not merely a city. It was a statement. A declaration of power, a heart that beat for an entire kingdom. Liana's hands tightened on the reins. She felt exposed, small, swallowed by the immensity of it. To one who had lived among shadows, the weight of such presence was suffocating. She wanted to turn back, to vanish into the trees, to run until she was lost again. But the soldiers pressed forward, and Matthias's figure rode at their head, unyielding, unstoppable. The tide could not be turned. As they descended into the valley, they passed the first farms. Men and women paused in their work to watch, bowing their heads as the Alpha King passed. Children darted from doorways, their eyes wide, pointing at the column of black and silver soldiers. Whispers rose, traveling like smoke. The Alpha King. The Alpha King rides. Liana kept her hood low, her heart pounding. Yet even with her face shadowed, she felt their eyes on her. The stranger at their king's side, the woman whose presence stirred whispers already reaching beyond the battlefield. By dusk, the company reached a small outpost at the foot of the hills leading toward the capital. The soldiers moved swiftly to set camp, their discipline undiminished despite weariness. Fires sprang up, horses were tended, weapons sharpened. Liana sat apart, as she always did, the weight of countless eyes heavy upon her. Matthias approached once more as night deepened. He stood before her, tall and dark, his golden eyes catching the firelight. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice steady. "By nightfall you will stand within Blackthorn's walls." Liana's chest tightened, fear and defiance twisting together. "And when I do, what then? Will they cage me? Parade me as your prize?" Matthias's gaze sharpened, though his voice did not rise. "They will see you as what you are, a woman with a gift that can change the fate of kingdoms. What happens after that will be for you to decide." She stared at him, her heart pounding, her voice rough. "And if I choose to walk away once the gates close behind me?" The faintest curve touched his mouth, not a smile, but a shadow of one. "Then you will discover that the capital has many doors, but none that open without my hand." The words should have chilled her. Instead, they struck with strange certainty, a reminder of the bond already formed in song and blood. She turned away, pulling her cloak tighter, staring into the fire. Tomorrow would bring the capital, with all its dangers and possibilities. For now, she closed her eyes against the weight of its shadow, knowing that when she opened them again, nothing would ever be the same. The dawn rose pale and sharp over the valley, painting the horizon in muted golds and silvers. The company set out early, their horses climbing the winding road that carved its way toward the hills. The air was crisper here, touched with the smoke of countless chimneys that drifted faintly from the sprawling city ahead. Liana rode in silence, her hood pulled low over her face, her heart pounding with each step that brought her closer to the gates of Blackthorn. She had imagined this moment countless times in childhood, riding into a great city at the side of her pack, welcomed as one among many. Instead, she was a stranger, a solitary figure swept up in the tide of soldiers, her presence heavy with whispers she could already feel pressing against her skin. The walls rose higher as they approached, massive structures of stone, blackened with age and weather, towering above the road until they seemed to scrape the sky itself. Banners rippled from their peaks, the silver wolf of blackthorn gleaming in the morning light. To Liana, who had lived 12 years beneath the canopy of trees, the scale of it was overwhelming, suffocating. She had lived in silence for so long that the noise of civilization, distant bells, hammering, shouts seemed to claw at her ears. As they reached the gates, people gathered along the roadside. Farmers, merchants, children, all drawn by the sight of their alpha king returning with his guard. They bowed their heads or knelt as he passed, reverence etched into every gesture. Their eyes followed him, but inevitably they drifted to her as well. Curiosity sharpened their gazes, whispers tumbling from one mouth to another. Who is she? Why does she ride beside him? She does not wear the colors. She is not one of us. Liana's chest tightened. She pulled her hood lower, wishing for the shadows of the forest, the anonymity of silence. Here, she could not disappear. Here, every eye sought her. The gates yawned wide, swallowing them into the city. Within, the noise doubled, streets alive with voices and movement. Merchants cried their wares from stalls brimming with fruit, cloth, and tools. Horses clattered over cobblestone, children darted through alleys, laughter and argument collided in the air. The press of humanity was everywhere, each scent and sound crashing against her senses until her wolf stirred uneasily within her chest. She kept her head down, her pulse a frantic drum. She had lived as a shadow for so long that to be thrust into the light felt unbearable, yet the company rode on, cutting a clear path through the throng. Wherever Matthias passed, people stilled, bowing their heads, reverence rippling outward like a wave. Their devotion to him was tangible, heavy in the air. He was their alpha king, not only feared but followed, not only ruler but protector. At the heart of the city rose the fortress, Blackthorn Tower. Its walls were carved directly from the mountain, rising in sweeping arches and jagged spires, both beautiful and forbidding. Its size dwarfed everything around it, casting the lower city in shadow, even as the sun rose higher. Liana's breath caught as she beheld it. It was less a castle than a declaration, a reminder to all who entered that this was the seat of power, immovable and eternal. They passed through its gates, soldiers saluting as their king rode through. The courtyard beyond was broad and paved in black stone, banners snapping in the breeze, servants and guards moved swiftly to attend them, horses taken, supplies gathered. The company dissolved into ordered motion, each member falling into their duties. Liana dismounted with stiff legs, her body aching from days in the saddle. She clutched her cloak close, feeling small and unmoored beneath the looming towers. For the first time, she realized the true scope of what she had agreed to. She was no longer a ghost by the river. She was within the heart of power itself, where every step she took would be seen, where every word she spoke would matter. Matthias dismounted with fluid grace, his black cloak sweeping behind him. He spoke briefly to one of his captains, his voice low, then turned to her. Come. The command was simple, yet it carried the weight of inevitability. She followed him through the great doors of the fortress, the air inside cool and heavy with the scent of stone and smoke. The halls were vast, lined with tapestries and carvings of wolves and battles past. Servants bowed as Matthias passed, pressing themselves against the walls to make way. Liana's steps echoed on the polished floor, her heart thrumming faster with each one. At last he led her into a chamber lit by high windows. It was not adorned like the halls of power, but filled instead with instruments and scrolls. The air smelled faintly of wax and old wood, of parchment ink and polished strings. A woman stood within, her presence commanding, despite her slender frame. Her hair fell in silver waves over her shoulders, though her face was ageless, lined only with the wisdom of years. Her eyes, sharp as cut crystal, turned toward Liana with interest. She wore robes of deep blue, embroidered with silver thread in patterns that seemed to echo music itself. Serenia, Mattia said, his voice measured. This is Liana. The woman inclined her head, her eyes never leaving Liana's face. So, the song I heard in the wind was yours. Her voice was melodic, resonant, each word carrying the weight of someone who understood the power of sound. Liana shifted uneasily, her hands tightening on her cloak. You heard it? Serenia's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. Magic of that strength does not go unnoticed. It ripples outward, touching more than the ear. I felt it even within these walls. Liana's stomach twisted. Her song had traveled farther than she had realized, pulling more eyes toward her than she had ever intended. She will be under your guidance, Mattia said. His golden eyes shifted briefly to Liana before returning to Serenia. Teach her to control what she has. She must learn quickly. Darius will not give us time. Serenia nodded once, her expression calm. Then she will learn quickly. Her gaze returned to Liana, sharp and appraising. Come to me tomorrow at first light. Bring nothing but your voice. That is all I require. Liana swallowed hard, her throat still raw. And if I do not wish to? Serenia tilted her head, her eyes glinting like steel beneath moonlight. Then your voice will consume you, and it will destroy more than yourself. Power untamed is not freedom, child. It is fire in dry grass. It spreads until all is ash. The words struck Liana with the weight of truth. She turned her gaze to the floor, unable to answer. Matthias's voice broke the silence. You are safe here, Liana. Rest tonight. Tomorrow begins the work that will decide the course of what you are to become. Safe. The word rang hollow in her ears. Safety was an illusion, one she had lost the moment she sang. Yet as she stood within the fortress walls, beneath the gaze of the Alpha King and the music master, she understood that her life had shifted into a path she could not escape. She lifted her chin, though her chest trembled. Then I will come, she said softly. Serenia inclined her head once more, satisfaction gleaming faintly in her eyes. And so, it was decided. The morning dawned sharp and clear, the fortress bells tolling low across the waking city. Liana rose from the narrow bed in her new chambers, her body still unaccustomed to the feel of walls around her, to the weight of stone pressing from all sides. The room was simple yet spacious, draped in deep blue fabrics and trimmed with silver. It was far more than she had ever known, yet it felt less like comfort and more like confinement. She dressed quietly, wrapping her cloak around her shoulders as if it might shield her from what awaited. Serenia's command echoed in her mind. Bring nothing but your voice. Those words had unsettled her more than threats, more than commands of soldiers. For 12 years her voice had been buried, her silence, her shield. Now it was to be torn open, examined, controlled. When she stepped into the corridor, 2 guards were already waiting, their armor glinting in the torchlight. They bowed slightly but said nothing, falling into step on either side of her. Their presence was not hostile, yet it was undeniable. She was not trusted to walk alone, not yet, perhaps not ever. The halls of the fortress wound upward, cool and dim, until at last they opened into a chamber bathed in light. High windows spilled dawn across polished stone floors. Instruments of every kind lined the walls, harps, flutes, drums, strange stringed creations she did not recognize. Scrolls lay stacked upon tables, the ink faded but precise, symbols of music and magic entwined. At the center stood Serenia. Her silver hair caught the light, gleaming like frost. Her eyes turned toward Liana at once, sharp and unwavering, as though she had been waiting for her long before she entered. She raised one hand, dismissing the guards. They obeyed without question, leaving the chamber in silence. Close the door, Serenia said. Liana hesitated before obeying, the heavy wood shutting out the sounds of the fortress. The chamber seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with expectation. Come forward, Serenia said, her tone calm but edged with authority. Liana stepped slowly into the circle of light. Her throat felt dry, her palms damp against the folds of her cloak. She She had faced wolves with claws bared, had sung songs that shattered silence, but somehow this moment unsettled her more. Serenia regarded her for a long moment before speaking. Song magic is older than kingdoms, she said, her voice carrying the resonance of truth spoken many times. It is not merely sound. It is will. It is emotion shaped into vibration. Every voice carries power, but only a few are born with blood that awakens the ancient chords. You are one of those few. Liana swallowed hard. I never asked for it. Serenia's lips curved faintly, though not with kindness. No one ever does. Power is not gift, nor curse. It is simply truth. And truth does not wait for permission. Liana looked away, her chest tightening. I do not want to be used. Not by Darius, not by Matthias, not by you. At that, Serenia's eyes sharpened. Then learn. Learn to wield your voice so that it cannot be used against you. A blade is only a tool when wielded by another. In the hand of its owner, it is freedom. The words struck something deep within her, unsettling and undeniable. She lifted her gaze again, her voice quiet but firm. What do you want me to do? Sing, Serenia said simply. Liana froze, her throat closed, fear clawing up from her chest. Now? Now, Serenia said. No words, no melody, only a sound. Let me hear the truth of your voice without chains. Her hands clenched at her sides, her heart hammered, her breath shallow. It felt impossible. For 12 years she had swallowed her voice, forced it into silence until her throat had forgotten its shape. Even now, after battle had torn it from her, the idea of choosing to release it filled her with terror. Serenia stepped closer, her eyes never leaving Liana's. Fear is part of it. Sing through it, or it will own you. Liana's chest rose and fell rapidly. She closed her eyes, forcing air into her lungs. The memory of the river came to her. The way the current had carried her song that night, the way it had lifted her grief into the world. Her lips parted. A sound escaped. It was small at first, a trembling note, fragile as a thread of glass. It wavered, thin and unsteady, and shame burned her cheeks. She wanted to stop, to silence it before it broke. But Serenia's voice cut through, low and commanding. Do not stop. Let it rise. Liana drew another breath, forcing the sound higher, fuller. It swelled, shaky but growing stronger, a vibration that trembled through the chamber. Her throat burned, her chest ached, but the note lengthened, stretched, gained depth. Then something shifted. The air itself seemed to hum in answer. The stone floor beneath her feet vibrated faintly, the instruments along the walls resonating in sympathetic chords. The light from the windows bent subtly, shimmering as though the note carried more than sound. Liana's eyes flew open in shock, the note breaking. The chamber fell still. Serenia's expression did not change, though her eyes gleamed with approval. Good. Raw, unshaped, but true. Do you feel it? Liana's chest heaved, her hands trembling. It felt like it was not only me, as if the room was singing back. Serenia inclined her head. That is the nature of it. Song magic does not exist in isolation. It shapes the world, and the world responds. That is why it is feared. That is why it must be mastered. Liana's throat tightened. And if I cannot master it? Serenia's gaze hardened. Then it will master you, and if that happens, no one, not even Matthias, will be able to save you. The weight of her words pressed heavy, but beneath the fear, Liana felt something else stir. A spark, faint but undeniable. For the first time, she wondered what it would mean not to silence her voice, but to claim it. Serenia stepped back, her tone returning to calm instruction. We will begin with the simplest exercises. Breath, resonance, control. You will learn how to channel emotion without being consumed. Your voice is a river. You must learn to guide its current, or it will flood and drown you. Liana nodded faintly, though doubt still gnawed at her. She lifted her chin, her voice quiet but resolute. Then teach me. Serenia's eyes gleamed. I will. and so her training began. The council chamber of Blackthorn Fortress was a place of weight. Its stone walls bore the banners of past victories, each standard a reminder of battles fought, packs subdued, borders defended. High windows let in shafts of pale light, though it did little to soften the chamber's severity. This was not a hall meant for comfort, but for judgment, for decisions that rippled across kingdoms. Lyanna stood at the edge of the chamber, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She had not been asked to come, yet Matthias had commanded her presence with a glance that brooked no refusal. She stood in silence now, half hidden in shadow, the eyes of nobles and generals flicking to her with open curiosity and thinly veiled suspicion. She felt their stares like nettles against her skin, but she held herself straight, refusing to shrink. At the center of the chamber, Matthias sat upon the high seat. He did not need a crown to mark him as king. His presence was crown enough. His golden eyes swept the chamber, sharp and unyielding, pinning each advisor into silence before words were even spoken. The first to break the stillness was Eldric, the elder counselor whose wisdom had long tempered Matthias's steel. His voice was low, resonant, but heavy with concern. "The emissaries from the east have arrived, my king. They bring words from Darius." A murmur rippled through the council. The name alone carried weight, a shadow that stretched long across the territories. Matthias's jaw tightened. "Bring them in." The great doors opened, and two men entered, their cloaks marked with the insignia of the Eastern Alpha. Their movements were measured, proud, their gazes sharp as they swept the chamber. They did not kneel. Instead, they inclined their heads, the barest fraction acknowledgement, without submission. Alpha King Blackthorn, the taller of the two, said, his voice carrying arrogance masked as diplomacy. "We come on behalf of our master, Alpha Darius of the Eastern Territories." Matthias did not rise. "Speak." The emissary's eyes flicked briefly toward Lyanna, and though his expression did not change, she felt the weight of recognition. News had traveled faster than she feared. "Our Alpha extends his hand in peace," the emissary continued smoothly. "He suggests renewed trade along the borderlands, shared patrols to secure the Silver Moon River. In return, he asks only one thing." "Okay." Matthias's gaze sharpened. "And that is?" The emissary's lips curved faintly. "The woman." The word struck like a blow. The chamber stirred with shocked murmurs, eyes darting toward Lyanna, her stomach twisted, her hands tightening into fists at her sides. She forced her face into stillness, though every muscle trembled with fury. Matthias did not move, but the air itself seemed to darken around him. His golden eyes burned as they fixed on the emissary. "You come into my hall and dare to demand what is mine." "Not demand." The emissary corrected quickly, though his tone carried no true humility. "Request. Alpha Darius believes one of such extraordinary talent should serve the greater good of all shifters. Under his guidance, her voice would be safeguarded, honored." Lyanna's chest burned. Honored. The word was a lie, as false as the curve of the emissary's mouth. Darius did not want to honor her voice. He wanted to chain it, twist it, make it his weapon. Her mother's warnings rang in her ears, sharper than ever. "Hide your voice, or they will take it and make it no longer yours." Matthias rose then, and the motion alone was enough to silence the chamber. His presence filled the space, vast and commanding, his cloak falling in dark folds around him. He descended a step toward the emissaries, every movement deliberate, lethal in its control. "My answer is no," he said, his voice low but thrumming with power. "Lyanna stands under my protection. She will not leave these walls except by her own will, and she will never serve Darius." The emissaries stiffened, though they hid it beneath masks of composure. "Our Alpha will be disappointed," one of them said, his tone sharpened by the faintest edge of threat. Matthias stepped closer, his golden eyes burning with predator's fire. "Then let him be disappointed. But tell him this. If he sends another pack across my borders, I will ride east myself, and I will not stop until his banners burn." The emissaries faltered beneath his gaze, then bowed shallowly, retreating toward the door without another word. The chamber was silent until the heavy doors closed behind them. Only then did the murmurs rise again, hushed voices weaving together in fear and speculation. Eldrick leaned forward, his expression grave. You have made your refusal clear, my king. But know this, Darius will not take it as final. He will come again, and next time it may not be emissaries he sends. Matthias returned to his seat, his jaw set in grim lines. Then let him come. His words were iron, final, yet the chamber trembled with the weight of them. Liana stood frozen at the edge, her breath shallow. She had been spoken of like a prize, bartered like a token of power, her fate discussed as if she were not in the room. Rage burned hot in her chest, mingling with fear, until she could bear it no longer. When the council dispersed, she turned on Matthias the moment they were alone. You should not have brought me here, she hissed, her voice low and trembling with fury. I told you I will not be their weapon, nor yours. And now Darius knows. He will hunt me. He will never stop. You have made me the spark for war. Matthias's golden eyes locked on hers, sharp but steady. You were already the spark. The moment you sang, Darius would have learned of you, whether you stood in my hall or in your forest. The only difference is that now you are not alone. His words struck, brutal in their truth. Still, her hands shook, her throat raw. You speak of protection, but what do you protect me from? His chains or yours? Something flickered in his gaze. Then not anger, not coldness, but something quieter, harder to name. From both, he said softly. The words unsettled her more than any command. She turned away, her heart racing, her thoughts tangled in a storm she could not untangle. High above the fortress, the bells tolled again, their sound echoing across the city, a reminder that time moved relentlessly forward. War loomed closer with every strike, and Liana knew that her voice, whether she wished it or not, would decide more than her own fate. Life within the fortress unfolded like a tide. Liana could not stop. Each morning the bells tolled, summoning the city to order, and each evening torches lit the streets until they glowed like veins of fire beneath the stone walls. Blackthorn pulsed with life, its rhythms constant, unrelenting, utterly foreign to one who had lived in silence for 12 years. For Liana, every day was a test. The servants whispered when she passed. Their voices dropped low, but she caught enough. The song Mage, the woman from the forest, the one who rides at the Alpha King's side. Some gazes held reverence, as though she were a figure from prophecy. Others burned with suspicion, with envy, with resentment. She had done nothing but sing once in desperation, and yet already her name rippled through corridors where her face was still unfamiliar. Serenia had told her it would be so. Power is never invisible, the music master had said. It calls to those who seek to use it, and it threatens those who fear it. Learn to stand in both storms, or you will be swept away by them. Still, Liana could not accustom herself to the eyes that followed her, nor to the way whispers seemed to fill every space she entered. One evening, as she made her way through a corridor lined with tall windows, two noble women in embroidered silks passed by. They lowered their voices, but not enough. She is nothing, one murmured, her lip curling. A wild creature dragged from the trees. She will stain the court. Then why does the king keep her so close? The other replied, her tone sharp with curiosity. Did you not hear? She sang on the battlefield. They say her voice broke the eastern wolves. Some call her savior already. The first scoffed, or sorceress. The court remembers the last of her kind, and how she burned cities with a song. The Alpha King may think her treasure now, but treasures tarnish, he will learn, was views. They swept past their laughter like brittle glass, and Liana stood frozen in the shadow of the window, her fists clenched at her sides. When she entered the training chamber the next morning, Serenia's sharp eyes caught the storm in her expression. The music master said nothing at first, merely gestured for her to begin the exercises. Breath, tone, resonance. Liana obeyed, her voice rising and falling through the chamber, weaving strength and rawness into sound. When at last she faltered, Serenia spoke. "What troubles you?" Liana's throat tightened. "They hate me. They look at me as though I am cursed and salvation in the same breath. They speak as if I am nothing but weapon." Serenia's gaze was steady, unflinching. "Do you expect less? You walked from silence into the heart of power, carrying a gift none of them possess. They will fear you. They will envy you. They will try to shape you into something that serves them. And Oben, I do not want to serve them," Liana whispered fiercely. "Then you must learn control," Serenia replied. "A blade untempered is wielded by anyone strong enough to grasp it, but a blade forged and honed belongs to the one who carries it. Will you be a weapon in their hands or your own?" The words sank deep, heavy as stone. Liana drew in a breath, steadying herself, and continued the lesson. Each note she sang reverberated through her chest, through the walls, through her bones. By the end, she was trembling, exhausted, but something inside her had shifted. Still, the weight of whispers clung. That evening, Matthias summoned her to the council chamber once more. She entered with her head high, though her heart was restless. The long table was lined with nobles and generals, each dressed in black and silver, their faces sharp with suspicion as they turned toward her. Matthias sat at the head, his posture straight, his golden eyes unreadable. "This is Liana," he said simply, his voice carrying absolute authority. "You know her name already. You know her gift. She stands under my protection." A murmur swept the table. One of the generals, a broad-shouldered man with scars across his jaw, leaned forward. "With respect, my king, what proof have we that her loyalty is ours? Song magic sways minds. How do we know she does not sway yours?" The words cut sharp, drawing a flicker of unease from the council. Liana's chest burned, anger flaring. She opened her mouth to protest, but Matthias spoke first. "My will is my own," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "No song can command me unless I permit it. And if any of you believe otherwise, speak it now and face me." Silence crushed the chamber. None moved, none dared. Still, the noble's words had left their sting. Liana felt their eyes, measuring her, doubting her, weighing her against their fears. When the council ended, she left swiftly, her cloak drawn tight. Matthias caught up to her in the corridor, his steps silent as always. "You should not have been there," she said, her voice tight. "You should," Matthias countered. "They needed to see you, to hear you. If you hide in shadows, they will paint you into the monster they already fear." Her anger flared hotter. "And if I stand in the light, they will chain me all the faster." He stopped, his golden eyes burning into hers. "Not while I breathe." The words were spoken with the weight of oath, and they stunned her into silence. She searched his face, but found no mockery, no deception, only steel, only certainty. Her heart thudded unevenly, torn between fury and something she could not name. She turned away, her voice low. "You cannot protect me from what they think, from what they whisper." "No," Matthias said, "but I can protect you from what they would do." The silence stretched taut between them, heavy with truth. That night, Liana stood on the balcony of her chambers, staring down at the city sprawling below. Blackthorn glittered with torches and lamplight, a sea of life and noise she could not escape. The whispers would not stop, the eyes would not turn away. She could no longer vanish, no longer silence herself into safety. But as the wind swept through her hair, she remembered Serenia's words. "A blade untempered is wielded by anyone strong enough to grasp it." For the first time, she wondered if perhaps she could be sharpened. Not for Matthias, not for Darius, for herself. Winter had come to Blackthorn. Snow drifted over the high towers, coating the city below in pale silence. From the highest balcony of the fortress, the world looked softened, as though the stone and steel of the kingdom had been wrapped in a white shroud. Breath fogged in the air, each exhale rising into the crisp sky before vanishing. Liana stood at the railing, her cloak wrapped tight around her shoulders, her amber eyes gazing over the capital she had once feared. 6 months had passed since she entered these walls, 6 months since her voice had been thrust into the light of power. In that time, the fortress had become something she had not expected. Not home, not entirely, but no longer a cage. She had changed. Serena's training had sharpened her voice until she no longer feared it. Each morning began with breath and tone, each day layered with lessons that reached deeper into the marrow of what she was. She had learned the difference between a song that soothed and a song that commanded, between melodies that healed and those that shattered. She had felt her own power turn from something wild and dangerous into something sharp, honed, purposeful. The whispers still followed her, of course. They always would. Song magic would never be ordinary, never be comfortable for those who lived in its shadow. Some still looked at her with awe, others with suspicion. But where before she had shrunk from their stares, now she met them with steady gaze. She had learned to stand in the storm. Behind her, footsteps approached. She did not need to turn. She knew them too well by now, the steady, measured stride that belonged to no one but Matthias Blackthorn. "You are awake early," he said, his voice carrying in the cold air. "I could not sleep," she replied softly. He came to stand beside her, his dark cloak dusted with snow, his golden eyes reflecting the pale light of morning. Together they looked out over the city, the silence between them comfortable, no longer heavy with unspoken tension. "The first snow," Liana murmured. "It always feels like magic." Matthias's gaze flicked toward her, lingering. "Even more than song?" Her lips curved faintly, though she did not turn. "Different magic. One that asks nothing. It simply falls." For a time, neither spoke. The city stirred below, faint sounds rising through the crisp air, merchants opening stalls, children laughing as they chased one another through the snow, guards calling orders along the walls. Life continued as it always had, indifferent to kings and battles, to whispers of war and the secrets of song. At last Matthias broke the silence. "Darius sent another delegation yesterday." Liana turned her head sharply. "Another?" "The third this month." Matthias confirmed, his tone flat, each one cloaked in the language of peace, each one demanding the same thing. Her stomach twisted. "Me?" "Yes." His eyes, bright and unwavering, held hers. "They fear what you are becoming. Or perhaps they desire it all the more." Liana's hands tightened on the railing. 6 months ago, the thought would have filled her with dread, with the urge to flee. Now, though fear still lingered, it was tempered by something stronger. Resolve. "And what did you tell them?" Matthias's mouth curved faintly, though it was not quite a smile. "What I always tell them, that you are under my protection, that you will never serve him." Her chest ached at the certainty in his tone. She looked away, the snowflakes landing soft against her hair. "And if war comes because of me?" Matthias's voice was quiet but fierce. "Then war will come because of him, not you." The words settled deep, warming against the cold. For all his ruthlessness, for all his authority, there was truth in him, and it was that truth she clung to when doubt gnawed. She turned her gaze back to him, studying his face. 6 months had etched no change in his features, the same hard lines, the same steady eyes, but she had learned to see beneath them. She had seen the man who carried burdens no crown could ease, the alpha who never slept deeply, the predator who protected not out of softness, but out of unyielding loyalty. Her voice came softly, almost reluctant. "Why did you come for me, Matthias? Truly." His golden eyes searched hers, and for once he did not hide behind command or pragmatism. "Because your song reached me," he said, his voice low, unguarded. "It woke something I thought long buried. Curiosity, yes, but more than that, recognition, as if I had been waiting to hear it." Her breath caught. The words hung between them, fragile as snowflakes, heavy as stone. She looked away quickly, her chest trembling. Perhaps it was always meant to be heard. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, brimming with all that remained unspoken. Slowly, Matthias reached for her hand. His touch was careful, deliberate, as though he gave her the chance to pull away. She did not. His fingers twined with hers, warm despite the winter chill. 12 years of silence, he murmured. And yet your voice found me. Liana's heart beat fiercely in her chest. She leaned into the warmth of his presence, the snow falling soft around them, the city stretching vast below. For the first time, she felt the possibility of something beyond survival, beyond fear. Not silence, not solitude, but something she had never dared to imagine. She had not chosen this path, but perhaps it had chosen her. And for the first time, she did not want to turn away.